Ladies and gentlemen, kids of all ages, it is the Wednesday. It is time for the Mattriarchy. I am Matt Reese. I am joined today by some old acquaintances. Well, I'm not sure how old they are, but I've known you guys for like 5 or 6 years, something like that. Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini, who write and draw some great comics, and we're here to talk about that. So, guys, thanks for coming on.
Hey, good to be here.
No problem.
Cool. So I finally sat down last week and read because I had both of these 2 books.
Oh, cool.
That I'd had sitting on my shelf. And I was like, actually, they're on a table, to be completely honest. And I hadn't taken the time to read them yet. And so a few weeks ago, I sat down and read both the Black Ops Volume 6 and Kamen America Volume 9. And I enjoyed them very thoroughly. Although it's interesting to me, this, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. But Black Ops is of course, the older property, but you have had fewer volumes of that. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just interesting.
Yeah, we do 1 Black Ops a year and 2 Kamen America a year. So Kamen America was able to lap Black Ops pretty quick at that rate.
Definitely. And so I guess of the questions, I have questions, but I don't have anything written down, so it's going to seem a little scattershot, I'm sure. But what you guys? I know Kamen America is ridiculously popular. You guys have announced you guys are having an in-store presence in Japan, which is nuts to me. Is that as crazy to you guys as it does to some guy in a basement in Nebraska? Because that's wild.
Yeah, I mean it is crazy. I don't know how else to put it other than I would say it's a dream come true, but it's not one of those things that we could have predicted. Like it's not something that we aimed for as a goal of ours. It just kind of happened. We've had licensing agreements. We haven't announced all of them. I think we've only announced 2 so far, but there are a slew of others that we will be announcing. They're going to come kind of as an avalanche, because I think we're going to have 1 before the end of the year and at least 2 at the beginning of the year. And then 1 kind of late spring and early summer is going to be another one. So it's great. I mean, we feel like we're blessed. It's very humbling just because, again, these are just things that we couldn't have predicted. But just to go back on the licensing thing. So they started with online sales and a little bit of inside baseball. The company that had licensed with us, they're called Movic, and they put their works out through dedicated Movic stores as well as Animate, which is like a big thing in Japan because Animate is the #1 retailer for manga, anime, video games, etc. And as part of the presentation, they said 99% of all of our goods are domestic. Less than 1% is international. And so one of our friends who lives over at Japan, we were trying to, gauge what he thought of it. And he was like, this is a big deal. He said, just to let you know, they don't even sell Marvel and DC at these stores. They don't, because they're trying to keep it as kind of purely Japanese as possible. And so when we entertained the notion and we met with them, and we approved it, they said, we're going to do it as online sales first. If you succeed, like if you can show that you can generate a profit, we will then put your things in stores. And so I was waiting on pins and needles to be like, I need those sales numbers because I want to know how we did. And then sure enough, like 5 days later, they came back and they said, you exceeded all of our expectations. And the one thing that I thought was, it was truly inspirational is if you look at their social media, they mostly promote very well-known anime and manga franchises like Haikyuu, My Hero Academia,
Spy Family,
things like that. And the lady who contacted us, she was very nice. And Mark will tell you because he was at this meeting too. I said, in your pitch presentation, it really did seem like you knew the material because you were picking quotes out that didn't even appear until volume 3 and 4. So she pulls out her omnibus and it just has all these bookmarks in it. And she said, I have read it and I love it. And I'm going to convince the team that this is something we need to invest in because I really think you have something going here. And it's amazing you're able to do it with no mainstream support. No one, like you have no big names supporting you. And so what had happened with those sales online was that was completely grassroots. And she even told me, she said, you generated so many sales without having to rely on someone else. Most of the time we license these things out and they don't even help us merchandise it because they just assume, well, we're a bigger name. We don't have to help you. It's your job to sell the product. Whereas like on the daily, we were trying to get people to retweet and to kind of share it on their own social media platforms and whatnot. So we were very happy with that because, she said your sales numbers were great. And so they're going to be in stores December the 13th. So that's going to be in less than 10 days.
Yeah.
What was
nice.
really cool about that meeting too was that when we sat down and we had our Zoom conference with them, everyone from their company who met us, they were all women, and we were the only two guys in that meeting. And they showed us their graph and their presentation, and they said that a lot of their customers are women, and that they want to sell Kamen America to female audiences as well as men, because men like pretty girls, but pretty girls also like pretty girls.
Right.
And
right.
so they
yeah,
want,
so Sailor Moon's like-
yeah, and
Yeah.
it kind of like surprised me in a little bit, because we get such a negative reaction sometimes here in the West, because they see how beautiful Carly is, and we're constantly on that Reddit subreddit, are men drawing women or whatever it is, where they
Right.
complain that Count America is too beautiful or something, and people go on streams and and say all this stuff about it, whereas over in Japan, girls like Kamen America. They like how pretty she is. They like her personality. They want to buy little Carly plushies, and they want to buy the Carly folders and things. And no one complains about Carly being too beautiful in one way or another, or exploitative or things. And it's just a very different attitude and outlook than what we sometimes get here in the U.S. It's very refreshing.
Well, and one of the things I want to hit on here, but before I get into that, I'm going to interrupt my own self. First of all, hello everybody in the chat. I normally say hey, but as we're getting going, and I didn't today, so forgive my rudeness. That we're doing it different today. So, second of all, how much of the popularity that you guys have felt like that the Japanese market has picked up is that you guys are portraying Kamen America is the embodiment of the meme, be the America Japan thinks you are. Right?
Yeah, we go pretty full bore into that. And they like it because, Mark and I are fairly new to anime and manga. Mark, I think, has been watching and reading both way longer than I have, but it's new to us in terms of how we kind of left it and then picked back up on it less than 5 years ago. But the one thing that shocked me about a lot of it was they never talk bad about their own country. Never. Like, you'll never really see them having diatribes about how bad Japan is, or when they're trying to show something like a criminal element in Japan, it's understood that the element is a small part of the country, and it's not even part of the national identity. It's typically gangsters or the Yakuza or just some made-up villain or whatever. Whereas in the West, in the arts specifically, there's this kind of constant overarching need to want to keep on digging up the sins of the past and talk about the bad things about America. And then I thought to myself, when I was a foreign student in countries like France and Austria, I loved kind of seeing their culture in a unique way. So it's kind of like you go to Germany, you go to Austria, you want to see a place where they're wearing like dirndls and lederhosen and like singing the Alpine horn. Realistically, of course, they don't do that like all the time, but it's kind of like, I want to see some preservation of your culture, something that shows that you're proud of it and that you haven't forgotten your roots. And I really do think that for our Japanese audience, they just say, wow, that's really neat, because you are portraying kind of like what we think of when we think of the feminine beauty of America, because it's apparently kind of shared around the world, like the Baywatch beauty. Like when I was living in Austria, they all thought that the men and women in America were essentially David Hasselhoff and Pamela Anderson. They just thought that all the men,
you're not that far off.
Which is kind of funny considering that David Hasselhoff was German. But so they have this kind of idea of what they consider to be American. And I thought to myself, when Mark and I were working on this, I said, Carly is inspired by girls I know. She's supposed to be kind of a quintessential girl next door. And you know this coming from a similarly kind of relatively small state, Nebraska, that you meet kind of like these really nice, down-to-earth women, and they kind of embody this like wholesome good naturedness. And yet, you know, if you see them running around in Daisy Dukes on a summer day, you're just going to be like, wow, that is a very attractive lady running around. And that to me is kind of like a quintessential American spirit that the Japanese really like. And they like the fact that we don't apologize for it. I mean, there's no reason to. In the 80s, we just had a slew of patriotic characters that were just kind of unashamedly American and just accepted it for what it was. So I do think that was definitely a large part of its popularity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no one respects self-loathing. If you're an American and all you do is complain about yourself and apologize for your country and complain about your country and express how much you hate America as an American, foreigners might say that, like, oh, that's so progressive of you, or, oh, wow, yeah, we hate America too, it's great that you see the faults in your own country. They may say that, but they don't respect you, and
and
that's not what they really want to hear. What
they
want is,
they're not going to find you. They may find a common cause with you, but that doesn't mean that they're going to respect you for it, because
no.
That's the whole
what they want is they want G.I. Joe. They want Sylvester Stallone. They want the America F yeah. They want us waving our flags and grilling in the backyard. I posted last week on the Japanese account on Twitter photos of an old diner that I used to eat at in Fairfax County that unfortunately got closed down due to government regulations a few years ago. But it was a very old diner from the 1940s. And it was the it was called 29 Diner, and on Route 29 in Fairfax County, and it was the quintessential 1950s American diner like you'd see in Back to the Future, and I posted that, and it got like 300 likes and hundreds of retweets, and the Japanese, they loved it because like they kept saying like, this is America. Like when I go to America, this is where I want to eat. This is American culture. People say like, oh, America doesn't have any culture, etc. Like we do, or we did.
Yeah.
The landscape has been changing so much, a lot of it has been erased. But people have a picture in their head of what America is supposed to look like, and they want you to meet that goal.
I think that's exactly why like the Fallout games have been so popular, is even though that they have, some of that disparaging of the excesses of American ideals, the aesthetic is so purely American that
there was
I think that's a big part of it, with that.
After the election, a lot of people were releasing old clips of The Apprentice on Twitter, and there was this one that was trending for a day. And it was one of the early seasons, and there was a man in the boardroom, and Donald Trump asks him, he's like, okay, now pitch your idea. And he goes, okay, so to start off, like, I'm white trash, I'm a redneck, and this is my idea. And he's about to go on, and Donald Trump says, wait a minute, go back. What did you just say? And he said, I'm white trash and a redneck. And he says, do you really believe that? And he says, well, yeah, I grew up in a small town, but I was a small town kid with big dreams. And he's like, I don't ever want to hear you say that again. I don't even care if it's true. Like, you never talk that way about yourself. And frankly, I don't want to hear any project from you knowing that that's the attitude that you're starting off with. You're fired. And he fired the guy right then and there. And I was reading the comment section, and apparently, I mean, that was harsh because the guy got the boot, but apparently he never did that again. And he learned a quick lesson. He's like, never self-deprecate yourself. We grew up in Arkansas, it's the South. I had a lot of friends who kind of talk about themselves that way when they're introducing themselves. And I've always been like, it's funny that you say that because it's, kind of a humorous way of breaking the ice. But it's like, I really wish you wouldn't, because there's nothing wrong with growing up in the country or growing up poor or growing up with means that were not ideal. Because obviously you made something out of yourself. It wasn't something that you decided to stick with. So I think that in a lot of ways, the Japanese audience that we have, they kind of respect that. And I have liked the fact that in watching a lot of their media that, yes, you have people from, I guess, like Osaka or different places that are not Tokyo in Japan, but there's never any time where they self-deprecate and they kind of make fun of where they come from. They're very humble about it. They're like, well, I grew up in the country, or I grew up in this region, not the big city like you did, but here. And I appreciated that. So we take notes and we learn. And it's like, there's a reason why young people gravitate towards this. It's not an accident. It's not just because the pictures are pretty. I think that they're drawn to the way that stories are told. And when you think about how they're told, they're really no different than how we used to tell stories back in the day. I mean, it's not like they're breaking the mold in terms of this. So I really do think that a lot of this has contributed to it's slow attention over there.
Mm. And I think one of the fun things that Common America does specifically too is because it's an international cast, right? That have come together around these American ideas, and it's a really fun way to see how those kind of personalities and that idea of pride and identity blend together to be something worth proclaiming. It's like sometimes I'll see people that I mean, immigration is a touchy subject, right? And there's definitely, an argument for letting too many people in too quick, right? But I occasionally hear people say that, all immigration is bad. And I keep thinking, there's Americans, that haven't got here yet, that they have that spirit inside them of freedom and self-determination and responsibility and love of their neighbors and
well, it's a matter of integration. If you're going to move to America, then you have to be ready to become an American.
Yep.
You don't move to America and then want everything around you to change into the country you came from and then wave your flag and everything.
Well,
and that is, like you're saying, it's a touchy subject. You're about to get into a ruined Thanksgiving
way,
dinner for the whole family.
Even living out in
Yeah.
Sorry. What I was going to say is that even in my rural city I live in, if I meet somebody that moves up from Denver or from California, and they get all bent out of shape because they have to wait for trains, I'm like, maybe you're living in the wrong place, man.
Right.
I think that even when we look at our geographic subcultures, I mean, was one of the big fears in the last election cycle. There was so much movement of Californians into Texas that people were concerned that it was gonna tip things.
There's a really good comment in the chat from the Metal saying that a lot of people like Texans because Texans are unapologetically Texan, and they love their state, they love their culture, they love their flag, they love their big hats, they love their cowboy boots, they love everything about Texas, and they let you know that they love everything about Texas. And I remember when I'm originally from Virginia, Fairfax County, and there is no Virginia pride. I mean, there are definitely things that are very Virginian. We're one of the original 13 colonies, but it's not Texas. People don't go around like, yeah, Virginia. It isn't like that. But Texas, it is like that. And I didn't get that until I moved. I live in Arkansas now, but we go to Texas a lot, several times a year to do conventions and things. And so I get to see a lot of Texas, and I've gotten to meet a lot of Texans, become friends with a lot of Texans. And I totally get that now, and I actually really respect that, and I wish that every state had that kind of identity and love of its identity and love of its culture and the things that make it unique. Yeah, so I get it.
Yep. No, and I was I know for sure when I was a kid, very small, we lived in Oklahoma for a spell, and my dad had two friends from work. One was from Texas and one was from Arkansas. And they got along pretty good, but the feller from Arkansas had a bumper sticker that said, "Beat the rush, hate Texas now." Because sports rivalries are real big thing.
But it's funny because the rivalry is definitely there. Arkansas is like everyone's enemy. They're Texas's enemy, Alabama, and LSU. But it's a friendly rivalry. It's very healthy. It's not like in a lot of European countries where like basically two soccer teams will kill each other, given the chance because they hate each other so much. But again, it's this kind of idea of sportsmanlike conduct. And we're very proud of kind of like our identity in terms of what state we're from and kind of our culture and whatnot. Even though, to be frank, having lived in Arkansas pretty much my whole life and in Texas for a spell, I just like the South in general. I mean, I just really like it because everywhere I go, I know that 9 times out of 10, I'm going to meet a friendly face. And the people who are not so friendly, everyone just kind of knows they're not friendly. And so we kind of know what to expect. And even during like the last 4 years, I honestly felt like the world, it didn't change too much in where we were. We felt very secure because of, kind of like we live in the red region, and so a lot of our daily way of life, aside from inflation, has not really been altered too much.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think that's also one of those things that, like, I mean, that's the spirit that preserves, right? Like, let's, like, when people talk about, there was this meme that goes around, what have conservatives actually conserved? And while I definitely say that there are some arguments that can be made about that as far as national policy goes, the spirit of America, I think, especially of rural America, while there's definitely challenges, economics and that kind of thing that have been a problem. I've more than once taken a group of kids from out here up to DC or Denver for different conferences or road trips or whatever, and people there are always so stunned at the kindness and politeness of the Nebraska folks, and they're just like, "How you guys are so nice? Why are you so nice?" And I'm like, I was just about to get after him for being a jerk. I don't know, man.
Always kind of frustrate me because you see a lot of like foreigners on social media. When I say foreigners, I just mean non-Americans, I guess, people who don't live in America. And when they say, like, oh, I visited America and everyone was so rude and the streets were so dirty and there was so much crime, they told us not to go places after dark, et cetera, et cetera. Like, well, where did you visit when you came to America? And they say
New
York City, San Francisco, DC, Los Angeles, Washington D.C., Chicago, the cities that they see in movies. And like, okay, well, did you go anywhere else? Did you visit flyover country, etc.? And they're like, no, why would I go there? Why would I go to Nebraska? Why would I go to Arkansas? Why would I go to these places? And I'm like, well, you went to literally the nastiest, most crime-ridden and unpleasant parts of this country, and you use that as your sounding board for what all of America must be like, when that's basically just these little clusters of unpleasantness, and that's where everybody goes to visit because that's where all of our movies and TV shows and comic books take place, and that's why Kamen America takes place in Indiana.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's one of the things that I really love about the series is how, while you definitely go to the urban environments and you definitely have, I love how you've been able to take between the Kamen America and the Black Ops books, especially particularly the crossover ones, where you've been able to, like, do the road trip thing, and so you've just show the wide angle lens of the American landscape. I think that's so neat. But the fact that you've centered the drama in that small town life and in that the bait shop around the corner kind of thing, and I really appreciate that. Once again, coming from the sticks as I do, it's great to see that. So.
Thanks. With Kamen America, we do have to strike a balance of, we want people to feel like the town of Oscar, Indiana is a real place, and we want to spend time there. But we also, it's Kamen America, not Kamen Indiana, so we want to show the rest of America. And so that's why we have Carly going to Detroit, we have her going to San Francisco, and we have her going to Texas and these different places. But that also gives us an opportunity to show how the different cultures in those different states and those different cities react and receive Carly and the Common Core and those characters. She's very popular in Texas, and I'm not spoiling anything because we already showed art of her dressed as a cowgirl in Kamen America 10, but she's going to be visiting Texas in Kamen America 10. But we also showed her in San Francisco in the previous volume, and she wasn't very popular in San Francisco because very different demographics are going to respond to Kamen America and what she stands for differently in different states and different cities in our country. And so we want to be able to show that variety within our landscape.
Well, and one of the things I think is really neat about that too is you occasionally you'll talk to a European who's been over here to visit, and one common complaint that I've seen online from Europeans who haven't is they say, "Oh, how can Americans don't even all have their passports and they've never been abroad?" And it's just like, it's enormous here.
Yeah, we tell them that you can
visit all of America.
If you can drive 8 miles, I mean, you can drive 8 hours in one direction and still be in the same state. And when we tell that to a lot of Europeans, they can't fathom that because their countries are smaller than most of our states. And that's why they need passports, because if they want to drive 5 hours in any given direction, they're going to have to cross several country borders, and they're going to need their passports for that. Whereas here in the U.S., we can drive day and night and we'll still be in America.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, just yesterday, my youngest and I were talking about plotting a 4-day road trip or through Nebraska to see some different stuff we hadn't gotten a chance to see yet.
Yeah,
I don't know if
Nebraska's a
pull it
pretty big
off.
state.
I'm sorry.
It's a pretty big state.
Yeah, it's not small. My eldest is living in Lincoln, going to law school right now. Brag, brag, and it's a 6-hour drive to go visit. So
Yeah, that for us is like driving across state lines to go to Dallas. And sometimes we would just go to Dallas for fun on the weekends, and that blows people's minds because it's like 6 hours. It's like, yeah, you wake up at 6 in the morning, you get to Dallas by lunchtime, and then you leave at 6 in the evening, and you're back by midnight. What's the problem? And they're like, that's crazy. It's like, well, it's a straight shot. It's one highway all the way.
So now, so let's go back to talking about the books a little bit. We talked a lot about Kamen America, and it's great. Have you guys had any similar reactions to the Black Ops property, or is that not? I mean, how does that hit with the fans?
It's very niche. We've always described Black Ops as the hard sell. Most American readers are basically, they've been inculcated into reading superhero comics, and so military action, even though it has kind of its roots in like G.I. Joe, for example, or Sergeant Rock, the reality is that it's kind of out of fashion. And so trying to just sell them on a military book, not just a military book, but one where you blend cryptids, mythology, and like cute animals in it, I mean, it's either that really grips you or it's a hard pass. So the good thing is that we had a bump in sales once we integrated it into the Kamen America universe, but it's tough to stand on its own two legs. It's one of those ones where it's really hard to grow as a property. We love it though. It's not one of those things that we just feel like has been like a total failure, but Kamen America is definitely like, that's where people gravitate to. That's really what they want to see. The good thing though is that because they share and occupy the same universe, we have the liberty to treat either or as supporting casts in their separate books. And so for people who might have not seen it, Black Ops 7, which will come out in the summer of next year, it's going to be the last book of the Black Ops main series, but the Black Ops characters are going to be folded into Kamen America. And so if you like the characters, you're going to see them again for several volumes. They're not going away. It just means that you're going to have to jump ship. And we are going to put a nice little tidy bow around the Black Ops series. It's not going to be like an abrupt ending. We're going to end it in a way where it's going to be satisfactory, but you'll also know that there's more to come. You just kind of have to follow the trajectory of where Kamen America is going to see where it continues.
Well, and that was one of the questions that I had, because I did see that announcement on there, and I am curious about why. I mean, I don't necessarily need an answer. If
I'll
the
give you an
story is
answer.
done, the story is done, right? But
I'll give you an answer. It's because I'm only one man, and we have.
I got you.
I don't want to give away a lot of our kind of our internal secrets in terms of the way we do things. It's by design. I talk to Mark talks to me, and there's reasons why we take the steps that we do. And because I'm the only person drawing Black Ops and Kamen America, occasionally on Black Ops I'll get some help from Matt Weldon, and then next year I'm going to get some from Hachi Fusa. Momentum is a big thing, and the momentum is with Kamen America. And now that the licensors are coming in and they're liking the success of it and wanting to see it continue, in a way we can't put brakes on Kamen America. But anytime I work on a Black Ops book, I'm putting the brakes on it so I can work on it instead. Right. I just got some numbers back from the Japan Comic Art Expo, which was over this last weekend. So They licensed out Kamen America. They published Kamen America as a variant in Japanese in 3 different types, and they sold out of all the books except for one cover. So
that would be like the formatting issues. I mean, differences, right?
No. It's formatted like a American comic, except it's in Japanese.
Okay.
They increased it to, I forgot what the size was. So it's a little bit larger than standard American comic book size, but it's one that the Japanese are familiar with as far as like a manga format is concerned.
Right, but so that's actually what I was talking about, was like sizes of the books themselves.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So he got back to us and he said the sales were great, like really, really good. And so he said, we need to plan for next year. And again, this kind of put forward this idea. It's like the Kamen America stuff is just there's some days where I'm just overwhelmed. I have to go to bed and be like, I have so much like just clerical work to catch up with in the morning. I have to answer this email. I have to read, this stack of messages from other people who are interested in doing X, Y, and Z, do Zoom calls, yada, yada, yada. So it's like, well, I had to sit down with Mark and be like, what do we do at Black Ops? Because we want to continue it. And we don't want to end it, but in a way we have to, because we're just getting to that point where it is taking up so much of my time to get one book done.
We were also at a good point narratively, just from like creatively speaking, in the storyline where we were at a good stopping point, because Apex Moth, the villain of the series, since we introduced him in Kamen America 2, he's had a plan in the works, and he's been, in each volume, he's been gathering resources, building up his army at Cryptic, and introducing new villains and things, and working towards this end goal. And after Black Ops 6, he's there. So we really only had, for Apex Moth, we really just had one more big story to tell with him. So we tell that big story, and it's basically the conclusion. That's the end of this story arc. So this was a good time to take a break from Black Ops and feature, again, like Tim said, feature the characters more as part of the Kamen America universe, but Black Ops as a solo series, to end with a big bang that'll satisfy everybody who's been following this ongoing story that we've been building up to.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about the Black Ops series, well, there's two big things. One is it's the best G.I. Joe book I have read in a very long time. And I've mentioned that before, but I mean, you guys get the notes of a G.I. Joe book so well. And part of that is the military action. The other part of it is the other thing I really love about it. I love the cast of characters that you brought in, right? When I'll be honest, and I've said this to you guys before, when I first heard the pitch, I was not impressed. It didn't catch me. It wasn't until I actually I took the time and read the first volume of My Hero Macadamia, and I just laughed my complete butt off. I was like, I have to see more of what these guys are doing. And I had a chance to get that first volume, and I just loved it. I loved what you guys did with Black Ops.
I think one thing that we did, if we could go back and redo and kind of have a do-over, one thing that's very obvious for people who have read both books is I think we know where the appeal comes from for Kamen America versus Black Ops. It's that Kamen America is a character-driven book, and Black Ops is a plot-driven book. Mm-hmm. It would be really weird to all of a sudden just give like Penelope like this really engrossing dramatic backstory or whatever. Right. Not to say that it can't happen. I mean, you look at G.I. Joe, and Snake Eyes essentially did not become like super popular until a couple of at least in double digits issues in, when Snake Eyes' origin was expounded upon, and then he became the star, and then everything became basically the whole G.I. Joe universe was the linchpin of Snake Eyes, is essentially what happened. We unfortunately don't have that luxury. Black Ops is a plot-driven book. We're more interested in exploring the world of how cryptids work and kind of like the deeper backstory in terms of how that world operates. But I think that would be one thing that we might have done differently if we went back. However, the good thing is that with Kamen America Alpha, which is the Tankuban manga that's coming out in early spring, we actually incorporate Black Ops from the get-go as part of Kamen America. So we are able to kind of integrate it as one whole thing. So when you read it, you're essentially getting all of the backstory of Black Ops with it too. But I like that. I appreciate what you say about how you loved it, after you actually got into it. But yeah, as you can see, it is why we had a hard sell, as you just mentioned, where you're like, man, that sounds like the most unappealing book ever.
Well, and it wasn't that it was unappealing. It's just like, I just felt like not for me. Right.
Correct. Yeah.
But something about like the razor wit of the Trump books, mm-hmm. that I just was like, okay, I got to see more of this.
Sure.
That was like, even though it wasn't the same thing, it's just like, Mark, just the way you were able to tell that story, and the dialogue and how enrapturing the pacing of it all was. I was just like, I definitely want to see what, because this is a crazy, weird idea that I don't understand, but I do understand this. And I had not read My Hero Academia at all but I was
Good,
able
because
to.
I hadn't either.
Yeah, I mean, just the thing is, the thing is having gone back and read it now, you were able to catch the tone of that so well.
Tim had been reading My Hero
Mhm.
Academia, and he guided me on a lot of the in jokes of that. He also got me to watch, I think, the first like 4 or 5 episodes of the anime, just so I could do my own research and understand like why he has to eat the hair to get the powers. You know what
Right.
All Might's characterization is like, what Deku's characterization is like, that sort of stuff.
It's so funny.
So I could at least be somewhat informed, and then Tim would help
Mhm.
fill in the blanks if I had any questions on that. But you notice like the first volume of the Wall Might series is very much My Hero Academia influence, whereas the second volume is more about like I think Infinity War had just come out, the Avengers movies is more a parody of that. Well, the third one is the Magalorian, which the Mandalorian parody. So each one is a parody of a different genre and a different series.
Right.
And we had a lot of fun doing those, and I did 3 Trump parody books. Tim did 4 because of that one he did with Trump Space Force, the one he did with Chuck Dixon. So we did for each year of Trump's term, we did one book for each year of his term, and then his term ended, and so we was like, all right, well, there's no more story to tell. So and even before that, we were as I think. Magademia 3, the Magalorian, actually came out in between Kamen America 1 and 2, as I recall. I know it came out after, because it also came out, I think, after Black Ops 3. I think we did Kamen America 1, then Black Ops 3, and then the Magalorian, and then Kamen America 2. It was somewhere in that succession. So we were still doing the Trump parody books even after we'd started Kamen America, and the only reason we stopped is because we'd done 4 Trump books in 4 years, and then his term was over. And so some people have asked us, are you going to do more, Wall Might books now that Trump's been reelected? And like, it's just, but we just came up with that problem Tim told you about, is that, we were having to end Black Ops because there's just not enough hours in the day to do all the books that we'd like to do.
Right. Well, and I mean, on top of that, I mean, I not to throw shade against your potential skill at all, but there's, you don't want to beat a dead horse, right?
And that was the other thing, is that how many times can you tell the same joke?
Right. Yeah. The Gold Standard is such it's such a great collection.
It's a time capsule. We should just leave it that way,
That's really my take on it.
Four more jokes about Trump going, believe me, it's going to be huge. Like, do people want to really actually want to read 4 more volumes with that same joke? There's a point to put a pin in it and stop. And we had fun doing it. We've never taken Wall Might out of print. We've always sold the hardcover on the Iconic Comics web store and the soft cover on Amazon and also on the Antarctic Press web store. So it's always going to be out there. We're always proud of that book, even if it rumples some feathers, like whatever. We had fun making it, and a lot of people have had fun reading it, so it's always going to be out there.
I have a funny anecdote. So
it's a time capsule in more than one way, really. But yeah.
Oh man.
In order to get Trump's voice down, Mark had to listen to his rallies, and I have heard Trump speak so much. I mean, like, as just a normal bystander, I mean, like, I've heard so many of his rallies. And I just remember Mark being like, for the love of God, if I have to listen to another Trump rally, I'm going to kill myself, because how much more of this can I listen to? But it dawned on me because recently, right before the election, people were like, oh my gosh, you need to listen to the Joe Rogan interview. It's so good. And I was listening to it, and I was like, if you've heard him talk once, you've heard him talk a million times. He doesn't have the eloquence as J.D. Vance. Like, I like listening to J.D. Vance talk because he's a really, really sharp guy. I mean, he knows more than 10 ways to tell the same story. Like, he can spin it in different ways, and every time he says it, it always seems fresh. Whereas Trump, I mean, if you know how he talks, there's nothing that's different. It's like, so, it's like Joe Rogan being like, so what are you gonna do about the deep state? And he's like, believe me, Joe, we're gonna clean it. We're gonna clean the swamp. We're gonna do it so good. I know the best people. Believe me, like we're gonna do it so fast, so quick. And people are like, man is brilliant. He's such a great orator. And I'm like, I like the guy, but come on, like he
Well,
said the
and
same
like and like
thing.
and like and the funny thing about one of the funny things is like Trump has a manner of speaking that is so indirect that I really think there he says, I believe he does say new things, but you really have to like filter it down to see where the new information is in.
Right,
And
right.
one of the things I love about listening to JD speak and why is that JD has an easy articulation where he's not talking down to you, but at the same time he's expressing big ideas in simple ways, and they're as direct and as Trump, but far more thorough.
I like that he curses. And not because I like cursing, but because he does it so naturally that if you listen to his interviews with guys like Theo Vaughn or Joe Rogan, you can just tell that it's his normal pattern. And I'm like, my honest opinion is I think that those interviews with JD Vance probably moved more male voters, because a lot of guys were like, I like this dude. I feel like I can have a beer with him.
Oh
and
yeah.
just sit back and watch, just look at the night sky and just talk a bunch of crap, whether it be philosophy or religion or politics or the economy or whatever. He's like a guy who's not going to BS you. He'll tell it to you, pretty straight.
Yeah, well, definitely. And one of the great things about it too is I think that I honestly think that JD tries a little bit to not cuss, but doesn't even notice he's doing it.
He doesn't notice, like, at all.
This guy's like, oh shit! I said shit. Damn it.
Yeah, I liked it. I listened to more JD Vance interviews than I did Trump. I think I listened to 2 Trump interviews the whole election. We Mark and I kind of tuned out, but after I heard something about JD Vance from my wife, and so I was listening to him, and I was like, oh, I like the way this guy talks. And so I looked up all the interviews he had done recently, mostly with like podcast comedians, and I was like, oh man, I could listen to this all day just because like it's so entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That guy is but in the chat, can JD Vance do the YMCA dance? I
it's not. So the Trump dance is harder than it looks. It was going viral, after the election, and I asked my wife, right. I was like, do you know how to do it? And so we tried to do the Trump dance without looking at the video of him doing it. And I'm like, how does that go? Like, you kind of pump your arms in the air, left and right, but then you have to do it down too. Like you're like punching towards the ground. So yeah, I don't know if JD Vance has the moves.
He may not. So this is man, the comments section is legit tonight. You guys are killing me today. Although back, I can't remember if I shared this earlier, but Philip Cummings had the great comment. Everyone knows jokes get funnier after the 1,000th time.
Right.
That depends on the joke, but there are some that do.
Because everyone knows that by
what was the joke that we were at so Philip, he drove to meet us at a really tiny convention in Arkansas. It was held in the gymnasium, and there was something that Mark said, and Philip could not stop laughing, and we were like, what was so funny? Like it wasn't that great.
I don't remember. Was that the show that Eric Canetti joined us at?
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't remember making anybody laugh. I'm not funny.
You're the comedy powerhouse.
Yeah, right. I should write for. I'm so unfunny. I should write for MCU movies.
You should write.
That bar is so low. All you have to do is have the characters say like, "Well, that just happened," and then everybody in the theater slaps their fins together and laughs. It's so easy. AI could do it.
We're not going to bring up the MCU. I'm so tired of talking about.
I know.
MCU and Star Wars and all that crap.
Yeah. That's fair. I haven't been able to watch anything since Endgame. That's
a good point to stop.
Yeah.
That's always been my suggestion to people who like you don't like Deadpool comics anymore. Like, okay, well, when did you stop liking Deadpool comics? All right, well, that's your run of Deadpool. That's when it ended for you. When did you stop liking Batman comics? There you go. That's the end of that. It's like I haven't liked
Speaking of those movies, because I'm gonna try and derail from that. Okay. I tried watching the Garfield movie. That movie sucked. It was so bad.
I haven't seen it, so.
Oh man, the first 10 minutes are good. It's like classic Garfield, and after that, it turns into a diamond heist. adventure. I'm like, what?
There's too much action, and it's Garfield. Garfield shouldn't have a whole lot of action.
Yeah,
in
he's
it.
a fat,
supposed
lazy
to...
cat
yeah.
who just sits around and
Mhm.
sleeps and picks on the dog and eats lasagna all day and watches TV. I mean, it's not complicated.
Yeah, save the action for Heathcliff.
That's an interesting point. So did you also dislike the Bill Murray Garfield film?
Yeah,
I never
those are
saw it.
awesome watch.
I never saw it, but I'll tell you a funny story. I was in Austria when Garfield, The Tale of Two Kitties and Transformers came out. Now, the Germans and Austrians have a problem with violence. And so, believe it or not, at that time, Garfield, The Tale of Two Kitties outperformed Transformers in the theaters over there. And so I was like, hey, did y'all see Transformers? They're like, no, we saw Garfield. That movie rocked. I was like, okay, let's take your word for it.
So I think my diagnosis of the one fix that they could do that would make Garfield good again, because I mean Lorenzo Music is gone, he's never coming back, we're gonna miss him forever. But it's not a voice actor problem. They've had like Frank Welker voicing him in like those terrible CG cartoons, and they've had Bill Murray in the live action movies, and they've got what's his name, Star-Lord, Chris Pratt in this new CG movie. But there's one thing that they're getting wrong, and that they've gotten wrong ever since Lorenzo Music died. They animate Garfield lip syncing when he talks. And Garfield
Mhm.
is much better when he doesn't move his lips when he talks, when his voice just sort of emanates out of his body in some weird fashion. And you go back and you watch Garfield and Friends, or you watch like the old TV specials and the Halloween special and the Christmas special, and you see like Garfield is so much more dynamic and funny when he talks without moving his lips. And you would think that wouldn't animators love to save themselves all the time and effort and work and labor of not having to animate a lip sync and just let Garfield's voice kind of hover over his face? Wouldn't that just be easier and cheaper? Because he looks so much worse when he talks with his mouth moving. But that's just my little gripe. I'm sorry. I'm a
No, I don't think I've ever thought about it in those terms, and I think that you are correct.
Welcome to the Garfield-archy, everybody.
Yeah. So I mean, because that's one of those things where like Garfield, because there's always even though he communicates with other beings in his universe,
Yeah.
there's always the question of whether it is he's speaking or thinking.
Yeah, because in the comic strips, it's always a thought bubble. Whenever he communicates, it's always through a thought bubble. Even if Odie can understand him, it's always like he's thinking, and all the animals are telepathic, and they just can understand his thoughts.
Yeah.
And they translate
body
that into
language.
the Yeah, it's like those. Except when you have those like Garfield without Garfield, when it's just John going absolutely insane talking to himself. Like those are brilliant. But
Yeah, that's
like...
a genius move right there. So, of course, speaking of Garfield and Kamen America, you have the Neanfeld property within the universe. Has that been also? I mean, are there Neanfeld fans out there in the world?
There are, but we can never ever merchandise Neanfeld. We are not taking that risk.
That's fair.
It's just a part of world building in the Kamen America universe that there's this this very popular Hello Kitty-esque anime property, video game property franchise. That's this cute, weird orange cat that Carly has been obsessed with ever since she was a child, and that's Neanfeld.
And I absolutely love like the in-universe cross genre marketing of Neanfeld. It's got the theme parks and the video games and the cartoon show.
I have a little bit of backstory for that. I don't think Mark will mind me sharing. I don't know if we've shared this before, but it's an interesting story. So like in Russia, did you know that Gadget Gearloose from Rescue Rangers has like a cult following?
Yeah, I don't think I knew that in Russia. I know people in America.
No, man. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was this flood of media that just made it over there that they were just exposed to for the first time. And one of the original pieces of American media that made it over there was Rescue Rangers. And I guess like they had never seen like an anthropomorphized girl mouse. And so there was like a cult devoted to Gadget Gearloose. And so
like an actual cult with like hives and things?
A self-proclaimed cult.
Okay.
So whether or not there's actually any religious component to it, I don't know, or whether it's just tongue-in-cheek. But I remember the early days of the internet, they called themselves the Cult of Gadget Gearloose. That was what they were called. And so we came up with this kind of funny version. Like we haven't explored the history of Kamen America too much in terms of like kind of things that happened in the past that were alternate, because there are a few things that only Mark and I know about, and we put secrets in the book that we're not going to tell anyone. We're just going to take it with us to our death. But one of the things that we had thought about with Neonfeld is, what if it went the opposite way, and things from the fall of the Berlin Wall came from the east to the west, including like the bootlegs of their media that outperformed ours. And so we had this idea of, well, you have like this orange tabby cat phenomenon with Heathcliff and Garfield. What if someone over there made like Neonfeld, which was like this really weird pastiche of the orange tabby phenomenon, and it became this huge thing. And so Neonfeld is kind of like, it's like Garfield and Mickey Mouse rolled into one. It's just kind of like that's the universe's like most popular mascot, and that it acts as a really good substitute for a host of different pop culture things that we can try and comment on. So that's kind of the fun in doing that.
Well, and one of the things I think you guys do really well that I think is a real struggle is that you guys do a lot of like pop culture referencing, but you're able to balance it in a way that
it's not Shrek.
It's not just that it's not Shrek, but it's also not Mystery Science, right?
Sure.
So like I love Mystery Science Theater, right? But there are a lot of jokes in Mystery Science that if you don't get the reference, it's not funny.
And that's the thing, is that I do like MST3K a lot as well. Thanksgiving just happened, and so of course, I watched a bunch of my MST3K movies, and a lot of the times the joke, the setup, the punchline is just referencing something, and even if I get it, it's not funny. It's like there's one where just Tom Servo just, for whatever reason, he just says Moominshans, and like, I know what Moominshans is because they were guest stars on the Muppet Show in the 70s, and there's some weird Swedish avant-garde mime group, and they're incredibly obscure, but I ain't laughing. I'm like that Meatwad meme where it's like, I get it, but I ain't laughing. A lot of it is like that.
And I don't really know Aqua Teen Hunger Force, so that doesn't mean a lot to me.
There you go. Yeah.
But I know enough what the name is, I guess. But even with that, it's one of those things where there's a lot of legit jokes that are mixed in there too. So you can, with Mystery Science, you can let it slide if it's something you don't get, or if it's just a reference and it's not funny. But one of the things I think you guys have been able to do with the writing is, even with the obscure references and pop culture things that you put in there, if somebody doesn't get it, it doesn't affect the story at all. You have an integration with the story in a way that if you don't get it, it still meshes really well.
It's funny you mentioned that. So one of the movie both Tim and I guess everybody else in the world loves is Back to the Future. And Back to the Future has a lot of very specific 1980s references for things that don't even exist anymore and haven't been relevant in 30 years. But the movie provides context for all of those references, so that it's like when Marty goes to the 1950s diner and he's trying to order a drink. And he asks for a Pepsi free, and the guy at the diner says, like, if you want a Pepsi, kid, you're going to have to pay for it. Pepsi free as a brand hasn't existed since the 1980s. I think it was the precursor to Diet Pepsi. Right. But earlier in the movie, they show Marty drinking a can of Pepsi free. So the movie gives you the context that Pepsi Free is a soda that Marty drinks, so that when Marty goes back in time and he tries to order a Pepsi Free, you know what it is without the pop culture reference or the contemporary commercials for it. And so we think the same way whenever we reference anything, when we did like the Trump comics, the Walmart comics, those were very much like, enjoy them now in the moment because these references aren't going to make any sense 8 years from now. That was very much a flash in the pan. We were going to have a lot of fun doing this right now kind of book. Right. But Kamen America is one that we want people to be able to enjoy 10 years from now. And we're already 5 years into Kamen America. If we had filled Kamen America 1 up with jokes and references that only made sense in 2020 and 2019, people who are getting into Kamen America now in 2024, 2025, they're going to start with Kamen America 1, and they're going to be hit with a whole bunch of pop culture references that won't make any sense to them, or will seem cringy because they're out of date. Whereas, our goal was to do the Back to the Future thing, is to always provide context for everything within the book so it can be read in a microcosm.
Yeah, and the one thing about Pepsi Free, I gotta drop my Gen X thing on it just a little bit. Yeah. It wasn't just that it was sugar free; it was also caffeine free.
Oh, okay. So it was
Yeah,
caffeine-free diet Pepsi.
caffeine-free diet Pepsi. Yeah,
Yeah.
the most exciting product to exist.
Yeah, or just drink water at that point, guys.
Well, and they actually, but the thing is, they explain that in the movie because they say, "Okay, give me a tab." And say, if you want to order
Yeah.
a tab, you've got to order.
And
We'll give you something without caffeine in it. So they
yeah,
give them like a
it-
water.
all the information you need right there as to what that is, because they also show Tab in Marty's bedroom at the start of the
Yep.
movie. So you see a
Yep.
can of Pepsi Free, you see a can of Tab, you know what those are. It's
Yep.
like Ghostbusters is the other example that we give, is that at the end, they summon the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. But if you're watching the movie, like advertisements for Stay Puft Marshmallows appear throughout the movie. There's a bag of them on the counter at Dana's apartment. There's a billboard for Stay Puft Marshmallows next to the firehouse. So it's telling you what Stay Puft Marshmallows are, and it's showing you the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. So at the end, when it shows up as a giant kaiju that tries to kill them, there's context for it within the movie. And so we think of it that way when we do stuff. It's different than like Tim brought up Shrek, and Shrek is like the way not to do things, because Shrek is like, hey, now you're an all-star, like whoa. Or I tried watching Scary Movie, the first one, it was made in like 1998. And I forgot that there's a whole like protracted scene where they parody the "What's Up" commercials from the
Right.
90s. And
Yeah,
if you're
that
watching
was bad when that movie was new because it was
that,
just
yeah,
like,
right. That was tired and old, like when that movie came out in 1998. But try to imagine watching it now, with absolutely no context for what the hell "What's Up" is, and like, what is this?
There's a bit of blasphemy if you watch if you watch Aladdin and you're introduced to the genie for the first time and he's imitating people like Arsenio Hall. You're just like, man, this is like really cringy, because who knows who Arsenio Hall is? There's maybe one reference in there that people will understand, and it's like Jack Nicholson. But it's like, it's like, unless you're like a boomer who just recently watched The Departed, you don't know who Jack Nicholson is,
Right? I mean, there's some
first
that
of all,
even
The
I've
Departed
forgotten
was
about.
amazing. So,
Oh yeah. But there's eventually gonna be a point. I mean, so you ever watch like a really old Looney Tunes cartoon, where they like they go to like the Hollywood Cafe or something, and there's
Peter
all
Lorre.
these and there's all these like actor parodies from like 1935 in there, and there could be 50 actors in there, and you might be able to recognize 3 of them, and they're going to be the Three Stooges, and that's it.
Yeah.
You might know Groucho.
And like there's Hollywood Cafe, when also any of the mob episodes of the gangster episodes of Looney Tunes.
Oh, and those were the best.
They
I
are
love them,
great,
but yeah.
But like as a child, I didn't know who any of these characters were, and then as I started getting into old movies and stuff, I'm like,
Right.
oh, that's that guy. Oh, it's that guy. Oh, it's that guy. I recognize that guy from a Looney Tunes commercial, right, or cartoon. So like that, there's definitely that in there, but but at the same time, the pop culture referencing that you guys have done largely is it's internal enough, or it's part of the world building, so that like you're having your own pop culture referencing within the world of it.
I'll give you an example. So one thing that we do intentionally is anytime we're making a commentary for plot purposes, sometimes they're inspired by real world events.
No.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the caveat. Even if they are, we have to present it in a way where you can pick up the book 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, and the moral will still be the same, because whatever the dilemma is that we're maybe trying to comment on, it has a kind of perennial metamorphosis every generation. You'll find something that's equivalent to it. So I had made this comment a few days ago, but someone had updated the Kamen America TV tropes page, which is great. It's a really, really good page. You could tell that whoever's doing it has read the books and know everything. The only parts that they get wrong,
I gotta interrupt you for just a second to talk about how jealous I am that you guys have a TV tropes page.
I didn't even know. Someone had to tell me. They're like, you have a TV tropes page, right? I was like, what,
amazing.
Really?
That right there. That is the big time.
The only thing that they got wrong was some of the assumptions that they made. For example, they were like, well, with regards to the black suit protesters, that's clearly a reference to COVID. And I'm like, it's actually not. We wrote it. COVID. Yeah, we wrote it in a way where it references any type of mass phenomenon where you're kind of scared and fear-mongered into thinking that there's a threat that's much bigger than it really is, and the public hasn't had time to actually cognizantly think to themselves like, hey, are we overreacting to this? So I mean, you could say it was a reference.
It's silly to say it's a COVID thing, because it's way closer to a global warming thing.
And it's a lot of things. It's
a lot of things.
It's the pussy hat riots, it's global
Yep.
warming, it's global cooling.
What's that
it's the oil.
Handmaid's Tale thing that a lot of
Yeah.
women are wearing right now? They're wearing a costume as a protest to political policies, or it could represent the masks that we had to wear during COVID, or it could be like those jerks who block the highway because of global warming or throw soup at paintings. It can be all of those things where people just go into a mass hysteria over certain events. It's a catch-all.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's because human behavior. Because this is one of the things that I think one of the things I like about Kamen America is how open you are with the religious implications of the thought processes that the characters are going through, right? And how and how that's like on the sleeve of the comic, right? People are dealing with these metaphysical ideas through metaphysics, right? So, but with that comes the assumption, especially in Christian philosophy, that human nature doesn't change, right? We're still the same people we were. And so the fact that you're dealing with you're dealing with these story metaphors about mob violence, about collective ideas, about fear mongering, it's going to reflect every single time. I mean, that's what the terror was, for crying out loud. That's that same kind of mentality that goes into it.
Yeah, and the problem though that we run into, and this is where like Mark's writing has to outshine anything that I do as an artist, is that whenever you have a patriotic character, you cannot avoid commenting on certain things that are kind of nationalistic, and you're making a commentary on something that that is affiliated with national identity. And with America's political scene, it's always been kind of tumultuous ever since the founding. I mean, I was talking about it with my wife, but not even within George Washington's first presidency, you had the Whiskey Rebellion.
Oh yeah,
and the Whiskey Rebellion was basically the whiskey manufacturers were like, man, you guys are hypocrites. We went to war over taxes, and now you're taxing us over whiskey. Like, well, how is this fair? And so, from the very
they were using whiskey instead of money, so they wouldn't have to pay tax.
Right. So, but anyway,
I mean, I'm not trying to say that like everything that went on with Whiskey Rebellion was cool.
Right.
They thought they found the perfect loophole.
But you get the idea is that ever since the founding, it's always been kind of like this Thomas Jefferson called a glorious burden. Like the presidency was not something to be coveted because you just inherited kind of this huge headache of having to kind of deal with political rivalries, even at a time when the nation should have been celebrating the fact that it had gained its independence. You always have kind of this strife that's kind of built into it. And so it's hard to have a patriotic comic where we don't address some of those issues, but we try to address it in the most broad sense so that anyone in any recent generation can pick it up and maybe they find something that they identify with that happened to them as a milestone in their lifetime. And part of it is also the fact that even though, some people point out that I think Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin were deists, most of the founding fathers had a Christian identity, and the idea was still baked into it that even though there was still a freedom to practice amongst the populace, that there is kind of a Christian identity in there. And so, I mean, part of it is that we always feel like the sky's the limit in our storytelling. It's just more fun when we incorporate elements of the supernatural, the metaphysical. Like the Japanese audience that we have, they like the Christian element in it because a lot of them, they're not antagonistic towards Christianity. They're just not familiar with it because they live in mostly a Shinto and Buddhist culture. And so they like seeing that kind of stuff as kind of
and there's been a minority Christian presence in Japan for 2 centuries?
Yes, there has been, for sure.
So it's one of those things where even if it's not part of their direct experience, it's not outside of their direct experience either. It's just like, I don't know an American who doesn't know a Buddhist, Yeah.
Especially nowadays. I mean, with the internet, you've met one at some point.
Yeah.
So when that when the Vatican introduced that character Luce, the little anime girl, and that was very divisive. I loved her. The Japanese.
I don't understand why. I still don't.
And yeah, me neither. I think it's just a bunch of bread tubers who need something to complain about. I won't get into that, but the Japanese became suddenly very interested in Christianity and very in Christian practices. They were interested in learning more, and so and on the Japanese account, I was explaining some of the details of Luce's character design.
Iconography.
Her iconography, that she represents a pilgrim. The reason that's why she has a raincoat on, and that's why her boots are muddy, and that she has a very specific type of staff from Italy that was for pilgrims walking a certain trail in Italy. And she doesn't just have a rosary; she has a very specific type of rosary that pilgrims carry, because the different colored beads on the rosary represent different continents, and it's all about brotherhood, international brotherhood and things, because she's being the mascot for a World's Fair in Japan. And now when I was explaining those things on Twitter, how rosaries work and things, they were saying, oh, that's a lot like our Buddhist prayer beads. We have those too in our culture. If you ever watch a lot of like Japanese ghost movies and Japanese horror movies, guess what? They have exorcists too. They're Buddhist exorcists or Shinto exorcists, but they call on their priest to come and exorcise an evil spirit from a house, just the way we have our horror movies where everyone calls a priest or someone to come in from like the Catholic Church to come in and exorcise a house. We have all these similarities. And they just at times they didn't realize it, because a lot of those, especially Christianity, a lot of those details and aspects, they don't show up in our media, not nearly as much as they used to. Yeah. If you see a Christmas special in the past 40 years, it's about Santa Claus. there isn't any Christianity in Christmas specials or Easter specials. They're about the Easter bunny and finding eggs. So they're not learning a lot about Christianity anymore. So when they find that stuff, they find it very interesting, because it's something that's very new and fresh. It's like as a Westerner, when we watch anime, I'm watching Dan to Dan right now, and that has a lot of Japanese spirituality in it. And they go to they have their spiritualist grandmother, the hot granny in that show, and they have their various like seals that they have kanji on them that act as basically ways of eradicating evil spirits, and all this stuff that's very specific to the Japanese view of spirits in the afterlife and how to deal with them. And I find that very fascinating, and it's all very obvious to the Japanese because it's part of their culture and their daily life. But for me as an outsider, I'm fascinated by it, and vice versa. They have no concept of Christianity, and so they're very interested in the aspects and the details of it. And it's an actual interesting cultural exchange.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of Luce, though, I have a question that is unrelated to any of your thing. Your last name, Mark, is Pellegrini.
Yeah, which is pilgrim, and
that's what I was going to ask, because I know Pellegrino is a word that means pilgrim, and I didn't know if Pellegrini did or not.
Yep. It's very, very common in Italy. There's actually a lot of Pellegrinis just in this state alone. There's even a few Mark Pellegrinis. I looked in the phone book, so there's a lot of us.
Yeah, and part of the reason it came up is I a couple of years ago I decided to go back to college and finish my degree. That was a great decision. But I did a whole one of my term reports on pilgrimages in one of my classes, and so I was reading all kinds of stuff about pilgrimages. And that's how I ran across that word. And I was like, I know a guy. So I've been meaning to ask you for like 2 years and hadn't gotten around to it till now. But the other thing I want to point out about the Luce thing, too, that I think is really neat. And the first thing I saw at the character was she has scallops. Her eyes are the blue in her eyes in the shape of scallops, which is a symbol of the pilgrimage of Santiago.
Yeah.
From the coast of Spain all the way down to Compostela de Santiago. And I was just like, well, that's interesting too.
Yeah.
So I picked up on that immediately. But.
And that was one of the things where like the people who are upset about Luce, I was trying not to get very heated about that, but I was like, every single element of her character design was done very deliberately. And all of it was to invoke her name. Her name means light in Italian, and her eyes with the scallops in them, which represent the rays of light, is that she sees the light and she follows the light. And that light she's not replacing Jesus; she's spreading the word of Jesus because she's a pilgrim. And it's just. Yeah, I won't get into all of that, but it's like people, were taking this surface level approach to the character when the Vatican didn't just, like make it up in an afternoon and call it a day. It was a very deliberately designed and thought up character.
Well, and I think if anything, it's and I think it is an evidence of there's the buzzword on in one of the buzzwords in social media in the last couple of weeks has been, or couple of months has been, media literacy. But it's also funny, many of the people that think that they're media literate really aren't. but there's really been a dearth of understanding of symbology, and America has something adjacent to an iconoclastic history and foundation with the Puritans and whatever, but you really can't get away from symbols and symbology. And one of the things that that also factors into, like, you guys definitely make use of in Common America. Josh, the cartoon guy, I don't know if you've read his Jane Smith Wannabe Gladiator, but that's
I did work for him for sure.
Yeah,
you're talking about the number one Marmaduke fan.
Number one Marmaduke fan, yes.
Yeah.
He uses a lot of symbology within his work, and I absolutely love that comic. It's a crime more people don't read that comic. But yeah, it's one of those things I think that we need to, as creative people, get back to using, so that people can start to notice it and explaining it in a way that when people start to notice it, when there isn't somebody explaining it, the symbology to it.
Well, it's kind of like this. So it's kind of tangential to what you just brought up, but it's something that I had kind of thought and have echoed to a lot of people who kind of have heard my thesis on it. But it's kind of like, you know how, like, now in the West, there's this phenomenon of, like, race swapping, right? It's kind of a controversial thing where it's like, why do you have a problem when we take this white character and make him black? Or why do we have a problem when you take this white character and make them Asian? Whatever it might be. But here's my logic. So whenever I'm designing a character, I try to have a reason or intent for every single part of the design process, from the eye color to the height to the way the hair flows to the certain features of the costume. There's an intentional design element into it. So when I choose, for example, the nationality of the character, so when Mark and I were coming up with the Xener Rangers, for example, we knew they were going to be an international crew, but we had to decide, why did we decide to make a certain character a certain way? So let's take Xener Hydro, for example. We made her Filipino because her backstory will involve a tragedy that happened in the Philippines, because it's an island nation that gets pounded by flooding all the time. So there's a reason to that. Now, what about, let's say, why do we make the characters white? Well, we're in America. There's still a majority white population. And for most of the people in the world, when you think of America, you associate them with certain physical characteristics. I always felt like by changing the skin color of someone, you might be able to say, sure, whatever, skin color is just superficial, I'm going to change it anyway. Well, in a way, no, because you're taking something that someone had to make the decision on to do. And you were talking about, like, why we should use iconography and stuff like that. We have a rich symbology that's kind of like, if you believe in, like, a collective unconscious or collective subconscious, is this idea that we have this kind of repository of information that's kind of a shorthand to tell you what certain things are. And I really do think that, as part of whether it's a metaphysical design or a design by a creative in the arts or whatever it might be, that there's a reason why we do what we do. And so I think that, going back to, like, Luce, every single part of her is designed meticulously to invoke a certain thing, and there's, kind of this rich symbolism behind it. And I know that for our Japanese audience, they really enjoyed it because they could tell. They knew that it was, I think it's Tokidoki who designed it, but they were like, man, that's the reason why Tokidoki is considered one of the best designers in the world.
It's in the vein of, in Japan, they have a huge regional mascot culture, and Tim follows these mascot accounts, and he knows a lot more about it than I do. But every prefecture, every town, like every institution, they have a Hello Kitty style mascot. But everything that goes into the design of that mascot is very specific to that region or that industry or that town. If your town is famous for fishing, then your mascot's going to be a fish or a fisherman, and they're going to have certain colors that are related to your town, maybe part of your town flag. They're going to have certain details and accessories that are all very specific to your town. And they're all designed very meticulously. And Luce is like that, but for the Vatican.
Right.
And so I think that's why the Japanese really latched on to that character, and they found her very inspiring because they could see, like, oh, that's just like the mascots we have.
Well, and that's so interesting you bring that up too, because one of the things that I think we are starting to lose, right? Okay, so like not everybody's into sports, right? But sports and sports mascots are those same kind of like local totems. And I mean that loosely, right? They represent the places where they come from, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that like in 2020, when there was all of those canceling and unpersoning of the corporate icons and sports mascots that went on because they were racially sensitive.
It goes even further back than that. I remember in the 90s, and people were really mad. There used to be a basketball team called the Washington Bullets, and they changed it to the Washington Wizards. And people were like, what does a wizard have to do with Washington, D.C.? It means nothing. Bullets may have been violent, but they are associated with Washington, D.C. because of this huge crime rate. I mean, that was always the joke, was that like, oh, they're called the Washington Bullets because you go to Washington, D.C., you're going to get shot, you know, and that's why they changed it. But they didn't put any effort into what they changed it to. They didn't turn it into like even the Washington Redskins, their stupid new name, the Commanders. You know, at least that has something to do with Washington D.C. Wizards has nothing to do with it, and it was just such a lazy, terrible name.
Yeah, and the idea that you know it's like the Minnesota state flag where they go to all the trouble to try to make it non-offensive by removing everybody from it. Right? They're like, oh, you know, the Minnesota state flag is insulting to Indians because the Indians are riding off into the sunset, and then they replace it with you know, the flag of one of the regional Somali flags. So it's great. So it totally takes the you know the Lakota and Dakota Sioux that still live in Minnesota and just ignores them entirely. So
it's like removing the Land O'Lakes lady, you know, the Indian who's on that. Like, oh, we'll just erase this. Like, you couldn't replace her. Okay, if the problem was her design, then maybe just design an Indian that you feel is less stereotypical of Native Americans. Like, nah, let's just delete her entirely.
And even that is so frustrating because the guy who designed Mia, right, he was Ojibwe, and he said, I'm designing an Ojibwe girl for this packaging. That because this is my culture and I want you to appreciate and learn from and participate in my culture because it means something to me. And they hired me to do this job, so let's do this. And they're like, oh no, let's get rid of the Indian and keep the land. You know?
Yeah, right. And that's the joke that everybody's been making about that. It's like, oh, you know, it's so ironic.
Yeah,
I mean, all the characters, like all the mascots that keep getting deleted are all ethnic mascots, like Aunt Jemima, you know, and have they gotten rid of Uncle Ben yet? You know, Uncle Ben's rice. Yeah, they did. Oh yeah,
that was in 2020. They did that too.
Right, like the only one who's going to be left standing is the Quaker Oats guy because he's white and he doesn't offend anybody.
Yeah, and that yeah. Anyway, there's some. That's the whole thing, but
yeah.
We want Uncle Ben back. I agree. But yeah, so
we know you do, Peter Parker. We know you want Uncle Ben back. We all do.
Okay, so one question I had about the in-universe stuff with this: how many years has it been? Because you guys have been doing this, like what, 5 years? You've
5 years.
Been into the commonality.
No, 4 as of this year. We started in January 2020.
Okay. Well, so we started Black Ops in 2019, right?
No, we started that 2 years before. We started that. Black Ops 1 was published sometime between 2017 and 2018.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, if we count Black Ops as the start of the commonality, then yeah, we've been at it for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. So how many in-universe years has it been?
Less than 2. I've given this some thought.
That's what I was guessing too. Was like you know a year to like 18 months is kind of what I was feeling.
Bingo. That's about where it is.
Yeah. So that was something I wanted to pin down because I wasn't sure on that. Another thing is, will you ever? Not that you need to, but will you ever actually explain where Misha's from?
We will at some point, but we just want to keep people guessing. So what we like about her is
she's a great game. I love it.
Well, she's like the Baroness in G.I. Joe. She's supposed to represent kind of like every Eastern European bloc country. I don't know if people have noticed this or not, but like her ahoge, like they call that little pointy bang that like a cowlick almost that kind of sticks up from people's heads in a lot of Japanese anime and
Oh,
manga.
somebody was asking about that in the chat, and I didn't know what it was, and then I
Oh.
forgot to bring it up.
Okay. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
right
what an ahoge is. If you look in volume 1, her ahoge is like a sickle. So it's supposed to be like the hammer and sickle from like the Soviet Union. And then starting in volume 2, it vanishes and it becomes kind of like a sharp, like almost like a boomerang. It's almost kind of like Carly's, except Carly's is more like a halo, whereas hers is a little bit more sharp and like L-shaped. So that's like a reference to that. A lot of people, I don't know, it's like not a running joke, but it's one of those things where I'm always like kind of puzzled by how people miss this. It's stated in volume 2 that she's not Russian. She just pretends to be. But she does come from like an Eastern European country. We just have not specified where she's from. We just like kind of playing with the idea that she represents kind of that area of the world without being too specific.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. It's I can't remember what it was. I had a thought, but I can't remember what it was. But damn it.
There are some hints, though. There are some hints.
I have to go back and reread, see if I can't suss them out.
Well, let me put it this way, because it's not spoiling the country. But do you remember Rodga? She used to be in our little social circle.
Oh yeah.
So Rodga and Shabby are both Czech.
Mm-hmm,
and her last name Lovakova, even though it's not a real last name, Lovakova, if you split it into two, it literally means like hunter in Czech. And so we originally had the last name pertaining to Kanina. Kanina is it's a derivative of their word for hare, and then Lovakova is a derivative of hunter. So it's like hare hunter, rabbit hunter. And so Misha is actually Russian for bear. So bear hunter is actually kind of like how her name would be loosely transliterated.
All right.
So. And she does speak Czech and German. That's been confirmed.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have all these. So when it comes to like the characters, there's a whole rich Bible and backstory for every character and for every little thing about that character that Tim and I talk about. And sometimes people will quiz us online and we'll engage with them. Like they'll ask us like, oh, what's the Common Core's favorite Chinese food? And so, but there's a rhyme and a reason for like why. Because like Tim was saying like, oh, well, Silvio likes crab rangoon because it's a very delicate, expensive, and elegant Chinese food.
It's not expensive.
Yeah, I know. But it's considered the higher echelon because she's a class act. Whereas like was it like chow fun or something there that Kimmy likes because it's a noodle dish, and Kimmy likes noodles because she's common ramen. There's a rhyme and a reason to everything. One of our Japanese readers, they're working on the next Comiket Dojinshi. And they sent me a DM on the Japanese account, and they asked me like, "Oh, we're working on a comic in the Dojinshi, and I want to know, does Carly know how to cook? And is she good at it or is she bad at it?" And so I wrote up this long because Tim and I have talked about it, and we've also talked about it online. But like, well, Carly likes to grill because she's American, so she loves to grill. She can cook hamburgers, and she can cook hot dogs and steaks and baked potatoes. And this is all stuff that. You don't see really come up in the book, but it's all stuff that's informed by her character because America has a long history of backyard barbecuing, backyard grilling, and it's a 4th of July tradition, for everybody to grill at the 4th of July picnic and kind of thing. So it's very Americana. And so, of course, Carly would be good at grilling. There's, I think it's the end of Common America Volume 4, there's a postscript where everybody's enjoying the 4th of July, and you see everybody eating hamburgers in the backyard, and Carly's holding a hot dog. And it's just kind of implied that Carly's the one who grilled those hamburgers and hot dogs for everybody because the picnic is at her house. And so it's stuff that you can pick up on it, but it's always that backstory that's in our heads that we have that make the characters feel fleshed out because we think about everything that they do and why they do it and what the backstory is for why their favorite food is this or that and and if they're good or bad at cooking, etc. and why.
So how many pages is the Bible?
It's not written down. It's all in our heads.
We do intend at some point, maybe next year, to put out a commonality guidebook.
Cool.
And maybe update it every 5 years or so, but it will essentially have a lot of information because that's one thing a lot of people have been asking about is we've posted some of the stuff where it's like we have the model sheets and everything. We give those to artists to take a gander at in case they want to draw the characters. But we'll have like a layout of like Oscar, Indiana. I know Doug wants to get involved too, so we'll have like a layout of how Steepleton looks like over in his universe, and kind of like how the layout of the Vander's home looks like. Because like at least in my head as an artist, I know what it looks like in my head, but I don't know if Mark knows or not. I mean, you can piece it together in a way where you can kind of see how it functions.
Yeah, when I'm writing the script, as long as I know how the kitchen connects to the living room and how that connects to the front door and the staircase, as long as I have a vague understanding of that, I can give instructions in my script for someone to be in the living room and then go to the kitchen or to go to the staircase and and have it make sense. Yeah, if I can understand how the Simpsons house works, then I can usually understand how Carly's house works.
Yep. I was working on a project a number of years ago with an artist, and I had the house itself was a character. I mean, not like a living character, but I mean, it shaped the interactions with the main character and her neighbors and the whole business. So
that's smart. That's like a really smart thing is when you treat your environment as a character in and of itself, it really makes your world richer. I mean, that's the entire reason why people know Springfield from The Simpsons. I mean, it's like most people.
Oh, Batman, Gotham City.
City, yeah.
Like that, and that was a lot of meat and potatoes for me back in the day. So I had drawn out like schematic drawings of the house and described the whole thing in the notes and everything. And the artist turned in some pages, and I was like, okay, this isn't possible. you can't see these things from these places in the house.
Sure.
It's in the schematic I gave you. And they were real mad at me.
Yeah.
I was just like, I don't know what to tell you, man.
Well, it's kind of like you ever see Psycho? The
no.
movie?
Oh yeah, yeah, of course I have.
Yeah, so it's like the Bates Mansion. Like you can go online and find like full blown like blueprints of how that mansion looks like, even though it's a fictional place that was like built on a soundstage. It functions. And I mean, if you watch Bates Motel, I mean, they go through almost like every single room in the house and has a character in and of itself. Funny story. No one has been able to figure it out. So I think it's only Mark and I who know about it. And I posted it a week and a half ago. But the Vander's house is actually based on a real house somewhere in the world. And I was like, does anyone know where it is? And no one could figure it out. So if people are listening to in the chat or are listening to this on replay, if you read Kamen America and you can tell us online where the Vander's house is based off of, you might win a no prize. And I posted some photos. I actually took some photos of the physical location, and people are like, oh, well, haven't seen it before. And I'm like, well, my only hint I can give is approximately 3 million people a year see it, but most people will not notice where it's from. But if anyone can tell us, I'd be very impressed.
Yeah, I missed those tweets. I may have to go back and look into that then. I probably won't figure it out, but
Mark will probably be like, man, if you can figure it out, you're like the biggest nerd. It's really obscure.
That's fair. Don't let the piercings fool you. I'm pretty much a nerd. So, there was I wanted to address the Jim Tuner's comment that I pinned up here.
Oh, is he in the chat?
Yeah, he is. I
like Jim Tuner. You ever hear my theory about him? I think he's an AI.
He is shockingly correct about almost
everything.
Yep.
He's Grok. I knew it.
He is Grok.
So, but he says, when will there be a standalone Lansky comic?
Never. I hate Lansky. So
who would want to read it? Screw that guy.
Lansky is. There's no one in our book who's based like on one individual, but some people are based on amalgamations of a lot of individuals, and Lansky represents every unscrupulous.
So are you saying there will be no redemption story for Lansky?
There will not be a redemption arc for Lansky at all.
Oh, come on. Everybody can have a redemption arc.
No.
What are you, Steven Universe over here? Get a load of this guy.
No, it doesn't have to happen in your book, but it's possible. Yeah. That's awesome.
Here's the problem, though. The problem is, Mark, I'm sure you saw it a few days ago on TV Tropes. They did point out one thing where I'm like, I don't think you're completely right, but there's at least one instance where you are. So in TV tropes, they said that we use the typical trope of the straw man, or in this case, straw team, because they're like, the Xena Rangers are all straw men. They're a globalist group who act very stereotypical, and they're just villains for the sake of villain's sake. Not true, because if you read Volume 9, we have very complex backstories for all of them, and I think that trope will go away with time.
The
However,
Xena Ranger storyline is not even over yet, so people don't jump to too many conclusions about the characters. Like if you read Kamen America, yeah.
Well, and then the thing about the Xena Rangers, like, it's just to assume that they're straw men misses the fact that like they have like they're even in Volume 8 there was conflicting motivations that were obvious within the nature. I mean, you've got I can't remember everybody's names right now because I'm terrible with that.
Just be like the red guy, the yellow guy.
yeah, the one of the black fella with the star on his face, right?
Yeah.
He's clearly like manipulating everybody. Right?
Is he? Is he clearly manipulating everybody?
I think so.
Okay, I'm just asking.
It felt obvious to me.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Believe it or not, there is a debate. I've seen a lot of people debating that. One guy was like, "Man, he's the bad guy," and someone's like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "He's the bad guy." And the other guy's, "No, he's not. He's just a minion." And he's like, "I don't." And he accused him of not having media literacy. He's like, "Are you media literate? He is literally the bad guy of the whole thing." And the guy's like, "I don't see it." So we're just sitting back and being like, "Okay, well, if you're going to debate this, I'm not going to interfere with it."
I mean, that's what brings people in.
As far as Kamen America 9, the most recent volume published, one of the Xena Rangers, Xena Techno, she's the orange one with the circle as her symbol.
Right.
And she's, even in Kamen America 8, we showed that she's not pure evil. And in Kamen America 9, we explore her backstory and why she became a Xena Ranger. Yeah. And like what her perspective on things, like if she thinks that she's doing, if she thinks that she's doing right and that she is helping people, and that by teaming up with Cynthia and becoming a Xena Ranger is her way of actually doing good in the long run, in the big picture, etc. And we see things from her point of view. And maybe that TV tropes section was written before the person had read Kamen America 9, maybe before it had come out and they didn't know that story yet. But well, yeah,
Algemil points out the Xena Pyro in Volume 8 was more concerned with keeping people out of harm's way than public perception.
Yeah, that guy is cool. We met him at a convention.
Algemil, cool.
Yeah, in person. That guy rocks.
See, I've not even met you at a convention.
I know.
He gets all the Japanese stuff. He gets better Japanese stuff than we do. He's good at it.
He's making all the same friends that we are. And but people here love him because he hooks them up with the stuff that they have trouble getting overseas. But we really appreciate the work that he's done getting some of that stuff to our readers here. But this is a long way of saying Lansky may be a straw man because we had fun writing him because he's supposed to be such a sleazy guy,
but people like that exist though.
But in a way, he's not a straw man because he's a combination of a lot of real world things that we've experienced. Because in our short time doing comics and in a longer time just working in academia, we've met a lot of really sleazy people. Right. And so when we're getting together to write, I'll tell Mark a story. I'll be like, "Man, you're not going to believe what this." Oh, here's a fun one. So Mark had this. How do I put it? Mark worked with someone who needed someone who was good at graphics. And so he called me and was like, "Well, you want to meet with my coworker?" And I did. And the coworker was like, "Yeah, I'm working on this thing and I want to hire you for it." And I was like, "Okay, do you have anything?" And she's like, "Yeah, we hired our in-house graphic designer and this is what they came up with." So she showed it to me and I go, "Ma'am, I'll be brutally honest with you. You could pay me $700 for a consulting fee and the graphic work, but I will tell you right now, you don't need me because that person did a great job and you should just stick with them." And she did not like that answer because on their university campus, essentially they have monopoly money budget to play with. And so she was like, "I was going to pay you." I was like, "I know you are, but I'm telling you, you could save the money and spend it on something else and just go with what you got because that's really good right there." Well,
yeah, go ahead and give some kid a scholarship.
Yeah, exactly. Well, apparently she did not take my advice. I left, and a few weeks later, I was like, "Whatever happened to that?" And Mark was like, "She found someone else. She did not take your advice at all." And so it's kind of like, that scrupulous, that behavior, we're like, save that for a rainy day, because we're going to put that into a Lansky script somehow, in terms of like how he just wastes time and money pursuing things because he thinks that he knows better than everyone else. So
yeah. Well,
anyway, he's the one character that might be a little bit one-dimensional.
Well, I mean, the thing about Lansky that would seem to make him a straw man is not that the character traits aren't realistic. It's that there are, I mean, it's unlikely to find one person who is all of Lansky.
Oh, we've met them.
Oh, I know there are a few. I know there are a few. There are even some that were had interesting adventures in the last month, I'm sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's like people say, like, villains like Skeletor and Mum-Ra, they don't exist in the real world. People who just do evil for the sake of evil because they love being evil, or they just want their own personal gain, like money and power or whatever.
Yeah, you ever see a
like,
Jeffrey Dahmer documentary?
Right? Yeah, like no one that shallow and that sinister exists in the real world. And like, okay, George Soros, it's like there are like actual real world supervillains, like that do exist, that are that shallow.
I was listening to a documentary on BTK, the Bind, Torture, Kill guy, and the shocking thing about him was, in real life, he was a family man. And so these cops are asking him, they're like, you killed like countless people, but you were married and had a kid. Like, what made you do it? You had a kid. Like, why did you ever try to do it to your kid? And he's like, no, are you weird? It's my kid. Of course I'd never do it to my kid. And so it's like this puzzling mentality of like, why did you do it to those other people? And he was like, because they're not my kid. And that was just the cold answer was, I'm an evil guy. I kill other people who are not my family. You think I care? No. So it's like, there are people in this world who, they're not mustache twirlers, but they are evil people out there for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, evil's real, right? I mean, that's the.
I was telling Douglas Ernst, because there was a few years ago, I was talking about a particular person, and I was like, this person is evil. And Doug and I were having like a philosophical discussion about that. And I was like, to be evil, you don't have to necessarily kill people. You don't have to steal from people. At its heart, what evil is it's intentionally aligning your will away from good. Emphasis on intentional. When you decide to do something because you get off on it and because you take pleasure in inflicting pain on others, despite the fact that you know it's wrong, but you intentionally do it, that's evil. And it's like, it doesn't matter how grandiose the action is. If you do it just because you're a prick, to be honest, you're evil in my book. So I'm like, there are people like that who exist. Right? Whether it's easy in a fictional setting to classify them as straw men, but I would also argue that those types of people are out there.
Well, and I think that we are too easy on the concept of evil too, right? Like, evil is a lot lower bar than people want it to be.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we all want to be the hero, and most of us are the villain, or at least we've been the villain from time to time. And I mean, you could say, "Oh, Reese, that's just your weird fundy hang up." And
well, it's kind of like this. So it's a screen cap that's been floating around the internet for at least 8 years. I don't know whether people like it in context or hate it. Doesn't matter. It's funny. So Mark was the one who showed it to me. It's apparently from a Spider-Man comic where he's fighting what's the name of that dragon dude, or like the lizard dude? Sauron. He's fighting Sauron, and he's like, "Why are you using your intelligence to make these dinosaurs to eat people? You could be curing cancer." And Sauron's his reply is, "But I don't want to cure cancer. I want to create these dinosaurs." And I'm like, that's a perfect answer if you're an evil guy, and that's just how you align. It's kind of like I've met a lot of people in my life who are geniuses, like literally very, very, very high IQ people, but they don't use their IQ in a way that you would think. They don't use it to go on a game show to try and win millions of dollars. They don't try to be a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, things that people associate with like very, very high intelligence. They're fine just like building boats on a dock. Right. And it's like, why don't you go and be a doctor? And it's like, because I don't want to be a doctor. I want to build boats. And
Yeah, I mean, think of all the people who go to engineering school, right? You're like, oh, you're going to learn how to make a television that will last 200 years. You're like, no, I'm going to go work for a corporation that'll pay me to build a television that will only work for 5 years, so you have to buy a new TV every 5 years. That's what I got my engineering degree for, is to do that. And like, I don't know, do you qualify that as evil? He's deliberately doing something wrong, but yeah, he's not. There are lots of people out there in the industry like that. Oh, is that what you got into this business for? Is that what you got your degree for? And it's like, no, but this is what pays my bills. Is doing doing stuff like that. So
Yeah, planned obsolescence, right?
yeah.
So, a couple of fun comments from Jim Tuner, of course. He earlier said, "So does this mean that there'll be no Lansky merch ever?" And
Who would want to buy it?
I don't think anyone
apparently
wants
Jim
it.
does. And Educated Viking responded with Lansky punching bag win. So
Yeah, there we go.
So he said also Jim says if she had only listened to Lansky to become Warhen, this comic could have sold millions.
Well, here's the thing just about merchandise in general is I think a lot of people have noticed is that most of our merchandise is of Carly, and we haven't actually done very much merchandise of the other Common Core. And so we're kind of testing out right now to see if people will want to buy merchandise of the other Common Core characters if they're as well established. We did we did a Kimiko cup ramen stopper. It's like a little resin maquette that you can set on top of your cup ramen to hold the lid down. But we're coming out with the Misha, the Common Comet action figure next year, because we came out with the Common America one this year, and so the Common Comet one is going to be next year. And so we're hoping a lot of people show up for that one to complete, because if Common Comet sells well, then you're going to get Common Ramen, and then you're going to get Common Victory and Common Terra, and we'll do more. And Lansky, we'll do the Lansky action figure, yes, with 500 points of articulation. It'll come in a box set. No, what we'll do is we'll do a Lansky action figure, but we'll do Badger as a pack-in. So for the people who want Badger, they have to buy Lansky.
That's hilarious. That would be that. See, we're back to evil again.
That's evil. Yeah, there you go.
Back to evil again. So the other thing Jim says that I just have to go ahead and comment on. He says, "My other hope is that Mark completes the story of the Crimson Chicken within Common America."
It's not the Crimson Chicken. It's the Shuttlecock.
Yeah, Shuttlecock.
That's his in-universe name.
Tim actually came up with that one. So all that has been Tim, drawing that character on the wall and naming him Shuttlecock. That all goes on Tim. So leave me out of that.
It had a name.
Wait, what?
The Shuttlecock. I didn't realize he had a name.
Yeah. I think I don't know if he's mentioned by name. Is he, Mark?
I think he is.
I think he's in the Gaiden books.
I spotted him on the wall and I just sort of chuckled to myself because, well,
so his backstory is that Lansky thought that he could help himself if he was like basically a mascot for badminton, the booming badminton industry. So his name is Shuttlecock.
Well, it ties into the name Warhen. It's one of those things that obviously it was a parody at the time for Carly of Warbird. Ms. Marvel is one of her identities. But the idea is that there was a point where Lansky thought that poultry were going to be the next big thing, so he wanted to create a whole bunch of poultry-themed superheroes for his agency. So Shuttlecock and Warhen were two of them. And I'm not going to give any spoilers, but we're going to explore some of that backstory of Lansky and some of those early characters in the Common Comet Gaiden comic, which was part of the Common America 10 pre-order for the people who ordered that one.
Right. I'm anxiously awaiting them.
Yep, because Ice Tosterone, Chad, he's a character he's already been in all the preview art, so it's not a spoiler. He's a character who's also going to be teaming up with Misha in that Gaiden comic. And as a lot of people know, there are 3 vintage characters from Walmite Volume 2. One of them is Carly, the other one's Marmot Maiden, and the third one is Ice Tosterone. And they've all evolved into the Common America characters, and Marmot Maiden and Ice Tosterone have been appearing regularly in the Common America book for quite a while now. So we had Marmot Maiden as Kimiko's sidekick in the Common Ramen Gaiden, and now Ice Tosterone is going to be Misha's sidekick in the Common Comet Gaiden volume. And But because those are older characters, you're going to learn more about their history with Lansky in that story.
So, yeah. Oh, pardon me a second. My throat got all hoarse on me. So, oh man, dadgummit, with my coughing, I forgot my question.
Oh no,
that's terrible. So you guys are in the Kamen America Volume 10 campaign, you also had the Kamen Academy collected edition.
Yes, correct.
Are you guys continuing with the webcomic after that?
No,
or you
so
guys...
it's finished. We moved on to Carly's America,
Okay.
which is the prequel series to Kamen America.
And that's the one that's ongoing. It updates every Wednesday on Webtoons. Our basically what we're doing with the Webtoons is that about every 2 years or so, we're going to refresh with a new series. So the first one was Kamen America, the web series, which after 2 years, we collected that in a hardcover volume called Kamen America Gaiden. And then the second one was Kamen Academy, and after 2 years, we finished that storyline up, and now we're doing the collected edition of that in a hardcover. And now we're doing Carly's America. That's the one that's ongoing right now, and that one's a prequel series that actually follows Carly when she was in high school, as well as Siggy and Vicky. But the main character that actually isn't Carly. It's a new character named Dan, who's a Japanese exchange student who comes to Oscar, Indiana, and goes to St. Jerome Academy, or high school, where Carly goes. And so he meets Carly, and he meets Siggy, and he meets Vicky. And we're inspired by a lot of these anime that we've been watching, which are... calling them educational makes them sound boring, but have you noticed that a lot of anime will teach you stuff about a certain subject? Like if you watch Laid Back Camp, it teaches you a lot about camping, but just through the stories told with the characters as they go on camping trips. So it's still very dynamic and very interesting. Same thing with like K-On! Teaches you about music and things like that. So Carly's America is going to teach is about introducing people to Americana, American culture, American history, through the lens of this Japanese exchange student, and he's also going to bring up differences or comparisons with Japanese culture. And it all at the same time, it'll also be filling in parts of Carly's backstory in Oscar, Indiana. We'll be able to explore Oscar more because the story takes place specifically in that town. So it'll make Oscar feel more like a living and breathing place. And you'll get to see Vicky and all them. Vicky when she was and Carly were great friends, and Sylvia when she and Carly weren't friends. That part of that backstory, we're going to go back to that era, so people should like it.
Totally interrupt. Sylvia's transformation, not even transformation is the right word. The space that Sylvia has had in the book to come to a new understanding of herself and the people she knows, and been able to stretch outside of Carly's preconceptions of her, has been such a pleasure to read. It's absolutely fascinating. I love it.
I think part of it is because she's my favorite character. I'm not the one who created her. It was Mark. Mark created her. But I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but he created the character who just happened to be a trope of my favorite trope in anime, which is I like they call them the haughty, not haughty like hot, haughty as in like
Haughty.
Haughty. Why? The haughty noble woman. And I've said it before, it's because that type of lady doesn't really exist in real life. It's something that's almost unique to anime and manga. But I like it. Every time those characters show up, I think they're the most entertaining characters because they're so grandiose. They tend to be really full of themselves, but they get humbled because obviously they're kind of overcompensating for their own faults. And then Mark was able to flesh the character out more. And I think that part of the reason why we put such a focus on her is because, and you'll appreciate this, Reese, because I know that you're a Christian too. The problem with a purely patriotic character is eventually you will come to kind of a philosophical or political dilemma of a conflict between the nation versus faith. like it's almost inevitable because the two have always historically been at odds. Even when they've tried to combine, it never lasts long. You know, you have, for example, the Holy Roman Empire. That was one instance where historically you kind of had the church and the state kind of functioning as one unit. But the reality is that
and in France in the Middle Ages as well. But
France in the Middle Ages, and then to some extent, even when like King Henry created the Church of England, you kind of had that unification too. But in a way, common victory, Mark has his own reasons in terms of like, and he's explained them very well in terms of like how victory represents how you can't have victory unless you all come together, which is how her ability works. She functions best when she can siphon off the abilities of the other characters and use it to create kind of a composite weapon. But the way I saw her is she and Carly are kind of two sides of the same coin. Common America represents the face of kind of national pride and patriotism. Sylvia is a little bit more faith-driven. Where she's coming from is a little bit more ideological, a little less heavy on the nationalistic side. But they make up, you know, two sides of the same coin, kind of in the same way in Sailor Moon. You had Sailor Moon and Sailor Venus. And to the untrained eye, other than the color of their uniforms, it's really hard to tell them apart. Even in the series, I think they had a lot of jokes about them being kind of like sisters from different mothers because of the way they acted. So I think that's why unanimously, I think we put out 2 or 3 polls asking people like who their favorite characters are. And it's always a toss up between the two of them, where it's kind of like a horse race to find out which one they like best. But I think people like Sylvia and her backstory because we took kind of a tropish character and expanded her backstory to be a lot more in-depth. We tied her into the primary villain of the current saga. We gave her a little bit more of a tragic upbringing, and I think that's why people tend to like her a lot.
Yeah, we wanted to. Sorry, we just wanted to subvert, subvert expectations. But one thing we wanted to turn on its head really early on was that when we introduce Sylvia in Kamen America 2, and we see more of her in Kamen America 3, it's always through Carly's POV and what Carly's interpretation of Sylvia is, and she sees Sylvia as this condescending, "I'm too good for you" kind of character. Whereas we find out partway through Kamen America 3 that that's how Sylvia views Carly. Sylvia always thought of Carly as this condescending person who thought she was too good for her. And so their whole lives, they had the same misconception about each other. It's kind of like, if you go to a high school and there are like these 2 groups of kids, each sitting on like one side of a lunch table with all these empty seats in between them. And one side, the kids are like, "Oh, those kids on that side of the table, they think they're too good for us. They won't come over and sit on our side." And then you go to the other side, those kids are like, "Oh, those kids over there think they're better than us. They won't come and sit over here." And they're both thinking the same thing at the same time. They just won't, vocalize it. And so Carly and Sylvia had that same opinion. And so they get over that by Kamen America 3. They still have kind of it's a friendly rivalry at this point. There are still things about each other that don't mix, that oil and vinegar kind of personalities, but that doesn't mean that they can't be friends. And so that's something that we wanted to show very early on.
They've got some of that city mouse, country mouse energy between them. And that one thing, Tim, you're talking about that the haughty noblewoman doesn't exist in real life. But I'm pretty sure that I've met some.
Have you?
Yeah, I believe that I have. The difference that I have experienced as kids, where you have the gal who's who's got that kind of highfalutin, untouchable attitude, and then she has a couple kids and then becomes very normal and reasonable. And not always, but I have seen a few of those. They seem to be really stuck up and stiff.
The thing that we wanted to avoid,
once their mom, they're like, okay, I found a place in the world, and I think it's.
I think we wanted to. What we wanted to avoid with Sylvia is that a lot of the times when movies, TV shows, cartoons, if there's a rich girl, the rich girl's always a mean girl. She's always a bad guy. She's always nasty and cruel to people. Yep. And we want to show that, no, just Sylvia does have money, but that doesn't make her a bad person. She's not mean to people. She doesn't make fun of people. She doesn't bully anybody. She has the haughty, it's in Japan it's called the ohojo, I'm sorry, laugh, where they it's the princess laugh. And so it get that aura of class and dignity makes people think that she's condescending when she's not, when she really just wants to help people. But everyone's kind of intimidated by her or resentful of her because she's wealthy and because she's classy. We watch a lot of like anime. Again, we go back to that. And in these group animes, it's like the after-school girls club animes, like K-On! And Laid Back Camp, and all these ones that we like. There's always a rich girl in the group, and it's always out of convenience, so that they can have like, hey, everybody, let's go to my beach house, my family's beach house this episode. You know, it's always something that's done for narrative convenience. But the rich girl is never portrayed ever as being a bad person just because she's rich. That's just a stereotype that doesn't seem to exist. That's just part of who she is, but that's not also part that doesn't dictate her moral fiber, you know.
Right.
And
That's
so
the same
like,
thing
well,
with the Scooby-Doo
yeah,
gang, right?
Daphne's rich, but she's not a bad person.
Came from money.
Yeah,
and it was actually really funny because in the Scooby-Doo gang, Daphne obviously came from money. Shaggy unobviously came from money. And then you've got Fred and Velma, who were like middle-class kids. They're just hanging out with their rich friends all day.
Right, yeah. And I was watching some pup named Scooby-Doo, and I mean, I just thought that's a good point. That was funny because they really played up Daphne being rich, and you know, having like these, like always arguing with Freddy, because in that one Freddy's a weird conspiracy theorist and Daphne thinks he's an idiot, but they're still friends. Daphne has a lot of money, but that doesn't mean that she won't hang out in the treehouse with her friends, you know, even if she thinks that you know, dust is gross. And yes, Shaggy, his family, even though they're middle class and his dad's a police officer, obviously they have to have a lot of money because they have to feed him so much, that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's just one of the Scooby-Doo is something I like a lot, and that has good character dynamics in it, you know.
It's a classic. So a couple things from chat real quick. Jim Tuner says, I always thought Warhen was a reference to Elizabeth Warren.
No. that's a weird one.
I thought as well when it first came out.
I can see that because she was from, you know, Kamen and Walmart, so yeah, I can see that.
Walmart, in the framework of Walmart, that was my first thought on that too. Ajamil says, will we see more Slamphibious Rex?
Yes, I think you will see him in the next saga.
That's amazing.
Because in the next saga, what we're going to do is we're going to explore a little bit more of how the internal hierarchy of the PPCs work, Powered Public Citizens.
Yeah, the world of the heroes. Right.
Yes.
So here's a question unrelated to this. I want to get back to the chats real quick, but I'm assuming you guys went PPCs because there was the questionable ideas of calling things superheroes with
correct. You were very smart.
So, but now that's been overturned.
That has been overturned. Correct.
Yes. So will you guys continue with the PPCs, or will the word superhero sneak its way in?
I think if we refer to it, it'll be tangentially as not a proper noun, just as a descriptor. We try to avoid any legal problems as much as possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, and one of the things too is when you say PPC within the context of your universe, that's it's a legally defined term within their framework.
It's something specific to the Common America mythology and universe, and so that's something that we are going to continue using. Whereas superhero is more of a generic term, a generic label for someone who's a hero that has superpowers. But powered public citizens are a very specific thing within the Common America universe that it has a whole bureaucracy behind it of how you have to register with the government. You have to open up basically like a GoFundMe. We call it a Come Save Me in that universe, is their version of a GoFundMe, where people can basically send you super chats in the way to go and do certain things. Or if you go and you save someone from a burning building, if they want to, they can reward you by giving you money or not. But it's all part of that universe. It's something that we're growing and defining more with each volume.
And it has its own it has its own separate tax laws that apply to it, its limitations and whatnot. But it's kind of like, you know, because we had thought about it, we were like, well, you know, you have in most superhero comics, you have people who are just kind of do-gooders and they just do it just because. And then how do you account for people who are like superheroes full time, like let's say the Avengers or the Fantastic Four? Are they getting government grants? Are they getting stipends? How does that work? So we came up with this really kind of convenient solution. It's like, in this world, essentially people are given donations, but they're given donations through the federal that they set up. It's kind of like, for example, my quote unquote company, like I'm the only employee, I'm the only owner, but it's a sub S corporation. Right. So I'm incorporated and I had to go through the bank to have that done. In the same way, you go through the bank, you say, "Oh, I'm a human that has a stupid human trick that I can do, and I think I can use it to help people." And it's like, okay, well, pay your little franchise fee, and we'll register your account so that people can start donating when they see you doing good stuff out there. And then this is how it works. So I think in universe, because people are kind of familiar with the term that we use, PPC, I think that's what we're gonna stick with.
Okay, very cool. Okay, so back to the things. Atomic Sage Lizard asks, is Mark going to do any more books, or is it full steam on Kamen America?
Well, if he's asking about like my prose writing,
Yes.
I don't have any novels planned, but I do have more short stories. I've got one that's just been published this past October in the Halloween special of Kursova magazine. That one's called The Creek Tumors, and it's available on Amazon. So if anybody wants to read it, just go and look up the fall edition 2024 of Kursova. There's also other really great stories in there as well. And I've got another one that's going to be published next year in Kursova. I think it's also going to be in the Halloween one. They tend to put mine in the Halloween ones.
I wonder why.
Yeah, there's always a horror story. So I'm going to keep doing at least one prose short story a year. I don't have time to write another novel. If I could, I would redo my novel, They Get You, and maybe split it into maybe. It's overwritten. I would love to kind of like rework it, but who has the time for that, But yeah, most of my writing these days, all of my writing is for Kamen America or Black Ops, or because I write the Kamen America series, I write Black Ops, I write the webtoon, I write the Gaiden one shots, and then. And everything else that we need me to write stuff for, so that's 100% of my writing time is on the iconic comics books that I've been doing. So unfortunately, I don't have time to take on any other projects.
So very cool, very cool. Neil points out that he was super happy to see Isosterone and Marmot Maiden return, which
Ooh.
I was as well.
Yeah, you like them a lot.
Yeah, they're great characters. They're so much fun. Much fun.
I'll tell you another funny thing about it was originally we were writing Isosterone to be what should we call it? His voice was supposed to be Johnny Bravo.
Yeah.
Like in terms of how he poses and stuff. But I think over time, how did it work, Mark? We took that personality type and we transposed it to someone else.
Yeah. So when I originally we were writing him, I had a Jeff Bennett's Johnny Bravo voice in my head, but that just didn't really work because once I saw how Tim redesigned him, I was like, that voice just doesn't work for that character, and so
He's
immediately
more like
the voice
Simon Belmont in
yeah
in
the
Captain
voice
N.
the voice I hear in my head when I write Isosterone is Scott McNeil doing his Duo Maxwell voice from Gundam Wing. It's very, very specific, but that's the voice that I hear in my head. It's very similar to his Proto Man voice from the Mega Man cartoon, but that's the voice I hear for Isosterone now when I write him. But the Johnny Bravo, Jeff Bennett voice got transposed onto a different character starting in Kamen America 9 named Sharkshank.
That's right.
And it is much more clearly a Johnny Bravo-inspired character with Sharkshank, and he's very fun to write. One thing we've introduced starting before Kamen America 9 is that so the world of Kamen America, the commonality, is a weird world. There's all the Black Ops stuff going on. There's all the Soul Finder stuff going on. All the Kamen America and PPC stuff going on. And one thing that exists in that world is there are shark people. We borrowed a character from Punchline by Bill Williams and Matt Weldon named Sawtooth, and he was a guest character in Kamen America and Black Ops 6. And we liked him a lot, so we started creating our own shark people. You met Sharkshank, but we mentioned that there are others, and it's part of the universe, and you'll be learning more about them. But Sharkshank's the first big one that we've introduced.
Yeah, and I had first when I had known that was going to happen. I mean, not the whole shark people thing, but the Sawtooth blend.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's spilling something, but I little bird.
Who spilled the beans to you?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Who's the leak?
And I was excited, and it was really cool because I love the idea about building this giant universe. I'm a big universe guy.
Well, okay, let me tell you a story about that real quick. I asked Bill. I said, "Can we borrow the character?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, what's his backstory?" And Bill's like, "I have no clue. I just wanted to create this shark human bad guy." And I was like, all right, well, there's no backstory. We're just going to run kind of in our own direction with it. And someone had asked us on Twitter, they're like, what's the deal with all these shark people? And I said, I'll just be frank with you. I like drawing shark people. That's it. And then Mark kind of just built around it. He was like, okay, well, there's like a TV series kind of like Cops back in the day called Boulevard
Street
Biters.
Sharks.
Yeah, and one place that we do draw inspiration from is a lot of our world building is like it's like the Tick. You just assume that the world is already a playground that you play in, and no one really bats an eye. It's just kind of how it is. So it's not too unusual to see a half human, half shark person running around. If you've grown up with a lot of weird stuff in your daily life, this is honestly kind of nothing.
Yeah. So when I knew that Sawtooth was going to show up, I assumed it would be kind of like the whole Chimeraton thing. So to find out that he was not the only shark person, I was like, what's going on?
Yeah, the Chimeratons only account for a very small portion of the superhuman things in our books.
Right.
There's other kind of more mundane reasons for a lot of the other abilities that people display.
Yeah, we don't want to overdo Chimeratons and have them be the answer for everything,
right?
Because that would just get boring. It'd be like if every Marvel character was a mutant, and didn't have a unique origin. That'd be boring. So Chimeratons are for some characters, but most of the weirdos out there in the world, they have their own unique origins.
So, the Jim also asks is please do a 2024 sequel to Thump the First 100 Days.
The funny thing about it is if you read that book, it is a time capsule. A lot of that cabinet, they did not last long, or they ended up becoming the biggest traders. I always said that even if you gave us a dump truck load of money to make, let's say, a sequel to Walmart, it would just be the most depressing sequel you would read, because like his vice president turned out to be not so great. A lot of the people, like I said, in his cabinet turned out to be not so great. So it's one of those things where it's like, with this, don't get me wrong, I'm optimistic, but we've largely kind of dipped out of politics because it's so unpredictable, even as far as this president is concerned. So not sure if it's something that we'd revisit. I think if it is something that we would do, we would do it at the very tail end and use it as kind of like almost like a historical document to just kind of recap the things that have happened. But it sucks as a predictor of like current and future events.
I mean, when you go back and you read the original Walmart trilogy, the main character isn't even Walmart. The main character is Mike Cocoon, our Mike Pence parody character. And man, that turned out, I mean, it would be an interesting story, top 10 anime betrayals,
Yeah,
but
it's not to totally take over it, like the frustrating thing about that whole ordeal, and I'll just got to say this one thing on it, and I don't mean to drag it up, but I understand Mike Pence's attitudes in January of 21. Once the House and the Senate passed a law that said that the vice president's role is only ceremonial,
correct,
every argument he had
went out the window, because if what he said was true, there would be no need to have passed that.
Yeah, exactly. And so even if he didn't agree with that interpretation and thought it was nonsense, you can't make that argument because other people agreed with Trump. Every one of those people that voted for him agreed with Trump.
The other thing I'm going to say, because I want to be charitable, is I've known several people who know Mike Pence, and they say that he is a very, very kind and nice person. And I saw something, I saw it 2 weeks ago, and it broke my heart. It was, so there's a Catholic apologist named Scott Hahn, and he encountered Mike Pence on a flight to Milwaukee, and Mike Pence was like sitting in the economy section, and he looked tired. Like he looked like a man worn down, and I felt a great deal of pity for him as a person, not as a political figure, but I just thought to myself, like, I disagree with what he did, but on the other hand, it's like, if he is as genuine as people say he is, that decision that he made, I mean, like, surely
it ruined him.
It ruined him, like, big time. So it's kind of like, it's one reason why a lot of that stuff that happened really humbled me in terms of politics. I'm like, there's a lot of things I really don't know about how that political arena works. And some people are made for it, some people aren't. And I think we said our piece, but for the most part, that's the reason why we kind of stayed back during the 2024 election, where it's like, I don't know what to tell you. I remember in 2020, people were texting me on election night, and they're like, was he going to win? And I was like, if they count the votes tonight, he wins. If they stop counting the vote, he loses.
Mm-hmm.
Plain and simple. And people are like, well, how did you know about that? It's like, well, people were saying for months that they were going to rig it with the mail-in vote. I mean, whether you want to use the word quote unquote rig it, you can't deny that the optics are really weird when you quit vote counting. You know,
I mean, in 5 states, they changed the laws or policies about the laws, you know, in many cases in contradiction to their own state constitutions. So, I mean, you have people in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania that both went on record saying, well, that shouldn't have happened.
Right.
And the authorities, I don't just mean like some jack down the street. I mean like the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania and the former Attorney General of who was hired by the legislature to do an investigation on the policies. They're like, yeah, this, and this, and this were against the law. I mean, it's just like, geez. Anyway,
that's a long way of saying that I don't want to disparage Mike Pence as a person. I will disparage his political decisions.
Yeah,
as an outsider.
Everybody can make a bad decision. That's just the facts. But anyway, back on the thing. So, a couple questions from chat, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
So Al Jamil asked a question he may not want to answer. Apex is Aped Mox Ingrid Cold or associated with Indrid Cold?
So I like this guy. Like I said, we've met him in person. So I will answer it right now. He is not Indrid Cold. He is associated with Indrid Cold, and that is the only thing I will say about this, simply because you asked a very intelligent question that will play out with time.
Ethereal Dragon asks, is Butch Killigan in canon to the commonality?
Currently, no, because when I talked to Sven about it, he's very, how do I put it? His timeline is kind of weird. It is, I can't tell if it's set in the modern era or if it's set in the future. There's a time jump from when Butch Killigan 1 happens to 2. But it's unclear of whether it's taking place in the current present or if it's a future with another time jump further into the future. So, and I've told him, because he wants to team up like really badly, and I was like, we can't do a team up where we don't feel like the worlds can gel together. They have to kind of coexist in the same space. Which is why
Common America doesn't have alternate universes. That's one of our rules. So there is no alternate universe Carly. There's no universe A, universe B Carly. It's just Common America. So if we do a crossover, that universe has to be able to realistically exist in the Common America universe. So like Soulfinder can coexist with Common America. But Kindred Heavens, unfortunately, can't. That the one by Scott and Bryce, because that takes place in an alternate past where hover cars exist in this 1920s, turn of the century kind of America, and that just doesn't gel with the history in Common America. So unfortunately, we can't really do a Kindred. We can do this. We do fun art and lithographs of the iconic comics characters interacting. We did that animation of Butch Killigan, Soulfinder, and Common America, teaming up at a convention booth. That was really fun. But as far as like a full-blown comic, if those universes can't coexist, then we can't really do a crossover.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Which is once again why I was super excited to see Matt Weldon's Punchline in there, and of course the oh my goodness, Regina Rogowski.
Rags?
Yeah. The sort of. But yeah, it's fun to see those characters interact in Black Ops 6. Very much enjoyed that. Fizz asks an interesting question that came up out of nowhere. I did not see. Could Narnia exist within the world of Common America?
I guess theoretically, it depends on how you see Narnia. If you see it as an alternate reality, or if you see it as basically like a cosmos that's in some other part of the galaxy.
Yep.
Theoretically, it could exist in that sense, but it cannot exist as an alternate reality.
Right. There you go. So it could be a world. Okay, now this is just silliness, but I got to share it anyway. Richard the Fox, I've wondered if the Isle of Sodor could exist within the commonality. minus the talking trains, of course.
Is Sodor that's a Thomas the Tank Engine, right?
Thomas the Tank Engine.
Oh.
I don't know enough of the lore of Thomas the Tank Engine
Yeah,
to
I'm sorry.
know whether or not that could exist. I did
So-
see an earlier question, or I think Ethereal Dragon. I just now realized that there was a chat the whole time. I was wondering where you were seeing all of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Soul
Sorry.
Finder is the same universe, so magic is in K. No, because Soul Finder is not magic. That's the key. The theological understanding of how God works in the material world through supernatural influence is not the same thing as magic. Actually, so Mark and I have not discussed this, but I think he and I are in agreement. I think he and I would both agree that there is no magic in Common America. And
Yeah.
the reason why is because he and I agree that historically we don't like the concept of magic because it's a deus ex machina for everything, is essentially what it is. It's just like, well, conjure up a spell, get an item, get a totem,
Yeah,
whatever.
it's like you say Alakazam, and then a 1973 Cutlass Supreme appears, and like, well, where did that come from? And like, oh, I just conjured it. It's like you can just create matter. Sure, I'm magic. I can just create matter, and I can teleport, and I can go through time, and I can do it. Like, yeah, that's boring, and that doesn't make any sense. It's like if you read an old Justice Society comic from the 1940s, where it has all these members of the Justice Society in it, and there's a chapter with the Atom, the 1940s Atom, and his power is that he's really good at uppercuts. And then the next chapter is the Spectre, the Wrath of God. He's going to another dimension. He's punching Cthulhu in the dick, and he's having all these crazy magic adventures. And then the story after that is the Sandman, who's a guy in a gas mask that can make people get sleepy. It's like these things don't really fit together in the same universe, or there's such a weird difference between them. In the Common America universe, what Soul Finder does isn't magic. It's supernatural. It's an acuteness and an ability to understand and cooperate with supernatural forces, but it's not magic. It's not saying hocus pocus and then having things appear and disappear out of thin air.
Right.
And
So
even-
the idea that there are spirit beings who have spirit abilities and that operate outside of the range of the physical universe.
Well, it's like the Ghostbusters aren't magic, and the ghosts within the Ghostbusters universe aren't magic. Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis actually, it doesn't really show up explained in the movies, but before they wrote the script, they explained in their mythology how ghosts work in that universe. And it's based off actual spiritual theories from the 1920s that ghosts are made up of ectoplasmic energy, and they gather psychokinetic energy, and that's how they manifest, and that's how they gain power. And then the proton packs can weaken the psychokinetic energy and whittle it down to just the ectoplasmic energy. And then once it's isolated, it goes in the trap, and then it goes in the containment unit, and there you go. It's got a whole explanation of how it works. So it's not just magic. Oh, magic ghosts appear, so we shoot magic rays at them. We put them in a magic box. Like, no, there's a whole mythology and a logic and a science behind it.
Mm-hmm. So okay, Ethereal Dragon asked a great question that I'm not going to address, just because we're to the end of the show.
Well, the gods in Ghostbusters are interdimensional beings, like Gozer, for example, or Zool.
So
yeah, they're worshipped as gods by primitive civilizations, but they're gods more like Cthulhu is a god. Cthulhu is just an interdimensional creature that we have a hard time understanding, but he's not the creator of the universe. He's not magic. He's just a being of higher dimensions than we are, and that's the same thing that Gozer is. I mean, Vigo's not even a god from Ghostbusters 2. He's just a magician that got trapped in a painting. And I say magician, not that he's magic. He's just a very powerful ghost.
And then one could even argue that it's mentioned in Ghostbusters 1 that I think is it Zool? No, it's Gozer. Gozer was he Sumerian or Babylonian as far as like a deity is concerned?
he's Gozerian.
He's Gozerian.
So they're saying it was from a Sumerian tablet. The thing is,
Yeah.
Oh,
which of course
gotcha.
is entirely made up.
But they're saying he was worshipped by the Sumerians and the Hittites and all these like ancient civilizations.
So you could still argue if you want. You could argue that it's like kind of what they were referring to biblically as the Elohim. So it's basically just if you look at a Christian interpretation, the gods of the ancient world were basically demons or
spirit beings of some sort.
Spirit beings or created intellects that have no bodies attached to them. So yeah, not magic.
So two final things. One is a little piece of information just to share because I love trivia. In relation to Richard's question about the Isle of Sodor, the Isle of Sodor does not exist, but there is a parish of Sodor and Man.
Oh yeah.
The idea, which is the Isle of Man.
Uh-huh.
The area of the parish that the Isle of Man is in is called the parish of Sodor and Man. To my knowledge, there's not a good reason why it's called Sodor and Man, because there is no Isle of Sodor, but there is the Isle of Man. So the Thomas the Tank Engine is supposed to happen on this island that doesn't exist, that is in between Ireland and Great Britain. So
I have a funny story about Thomas the Tank Engine. I had never seen it before, but a few weeks ago I was watching it with my baby, and it said that it was narrated by George Carlin, and so I turned it off for fear that there'd be cursing in it. So I still have not seen an episode. I still don't even know if it's the same George Carlin, the comedian.
It is. I don't think he curses.
He does not
it's a
swear at all
preschool
in
show.
Well, because they were singing the song, and it's like, oh, okay, we're gonna watch Thomas the Tank Engine, and it said narrated by George Carlin. I was like, wait a minute, is this like a Family Guy thing? Like, there's gonna be like cursing and stuff, or he's like,
no.
And then Thomas, the effing train went through the effing tunnel. It's like, I don't want my kid listening to this.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So anyway, the last question is, Richard also asks, will Black Ops 7 be larger than normal since it's going to be the last one?
It will not. It will be a standard. How long are Black Ops books, Mark? They're 72 pages. Yeah, they're 72 pages.
So,
but it will be. The art is divided between myself and Hachifusa. It is also very action packed. There is not a lot of room for slow moments. It is pretty much go from page 1 to the finish.
Yep. So Tim's already started drawing on the first 7 pages. So I scripted out the prologue for him already, and I sent him the revisions on that. And now I've got the page breakdowns revised for the main 2 chapters in it. And so I'm going to start scripting those. And it's full steam ahead now on Black Ops 7.
Well, very cool. Okay, we're going to call the show here. We've been at it for 2.5 hours. I appreciate you all's patience, Mark and Tim. Thank you guys so much for coming back on.
Right, sure.
And you guys can go out there and purchase Common America books on Amazon and on Iconic Comics directly from the distributor there and other places, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, you can just go to commonamerica.com, and there's an aggregate of a lot of the places that you can get it. Reese has already mentioned the 2 primary ones, but if you're a person who still likes going to kind of brick and mortar mom and pop comic book shops, Antarctic Press does handle our retail side of things, and so you can probably find it in back issues, although people have been telling me it's like really, really, really hard to find. You rarely find them in the back issue bins, but if you're lucky and you can hit up Antarctic Press online or in person at conventions, then you might be able to find it there if you like to go the floppy route too.
So cool. Well, I guess that's everything. Next week, a cast of regulars shall return where we will be discussing Tails Gets Trolled. So,
oh no!
Oh my gosh, are you gonna have Doug Tenaple on?
Not that time.
He and I did a stream with the Shitty Webcomics guys reviewing that. It was like a 2-hour stream.
Yeah, it was both Twitless and number 1 Marmaduke fan have been asking me about that for a couple of years, just every once and again.
It's because they're trolling you is what's happening.
Yeah, well, I've read part of it already. I'm going to finish it this week, but
I had never read it until they played it on stream, and I didn't know what to make of it. It was legitimately funny, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's like a candid camera thing where it's like, is this supposed to be funny or is it like unintentionally funny? And then of course you read the history of Chris Chan and whatnot, and it's very clear that it was the product of a very disturbed mind. But I mean, it was pretty fun to read. Doug Abel loved it.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I'll have to talk to him about it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
That'd be great. Okay, that's it. And until next time, get out there and read some comics, everybody. I recommend anything that Mark and Tim have worked on. They're all great.
Thank you very much.
Later, everybody.
Thanks for having us, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.